I will now call the Tuesday, April 12 special board meeting to order. We are convened as of 5:32 p.m. I would respectfully ask everyone to remain muted unless you're recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Please note that the official meetings of the RTD Board of Directors are being held remotely in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. The official meetings of the Board of Directors will be held via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. The video recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. Visit rtd-denver.com. And a live stream of this meeting is also available via RTD's YouTube page. Colleagues, being elected as a member of this body imposes an ethical obligation for each of us to enhance and maintain the public confidence in this agency. As a board of directors, it is our collective duty to our constituents, stakeholders, and staff to conduct our business in an atmosphere of mutual respect, cooperation, civility, trust, and collegiality. These are values we can all agree upon. As such, I encourage each of us to review the operating guidelines adopted by this board and to act in accordance with those principles, which are available on the Board of Directors page on the RTD website. Thank you. Ms. McManus, will you please call the roll?
Yes, thank you. Director Bouquet.
Present.
Director Broom.
Present.
Director Catlin.
Here.
Director Cook.
Here.
Director Davidson.
Here.
Director Deschel.
Here.
Director Geisinger.
Here.
Director Lewis.
Present.
Director Rivera Malpietti.
Present.
Director Rosenthal.
Present.
Director Sloan.
Here.
Director Tisdale.
Present.
Director Whitmore.
Here.
Director Williams.
Good evening, I am here.
Chair Busick.
I'm here also.
15 accounted for. Thank you.
Great. So with 15 present, 0 absent, we have a quorum. Next, we'll move on to our public comments portion of the meeting. This is our public participation period, which is open to anyone who would like to address the board. Those who would like to address the board but are unable to attend board meetings can submit their comments in writing at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Barbara, were any email comments received for tonight's meeting?
No.
Okay, we'll move on then. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. Staff will unmute you when it's your turn to speak. If you are dialed in, press *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please bear in mind that by participating in this process, you are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, then your comments will have to be submitted in writing. If any speaker has documentation or reference materials for the board, please email those materials to the board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. During this time, the board will not offer comments or responses. Directors or staff may contact speakers following their comments if they raise matters that lend themselves to follow-up. Speakers should begin their remarks by stating their names, and each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. Ms. McManus, do we have any speakers in the queue?
Yes, Chair, we have one speaker, Danny Katz.
Of course, Danny Katz, welcome. Please state your name and let's hear your comments.
Great, thank you. My name is Danny Katz. I am the Executive Director of COPER, the Colorado Public Interest Research Group, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. I believe you all are considering whether to adopt or support a bill, SB 22-180, which is a bill
I'm sorry, Danny. Can everybody, okay, mute that's not speaking. Thanks, I apologize. Keep going, Danny.
No problem, no problem. Thank you for that. I believe you're considering whether to support SB 22-180 tonight, and so my comments are related to that. Matt Fromer from SWEEP and I sent, I believe, a month or two ago, a letter encouraging consideration of a fare free transit program. And so I'm here tonight to encourage you to support what has come out of that SB 22-180. For me, unfortunately, I think we're going to see another dirty air summer, ozone pollution summer. And during that summer, we'll see signs that say and have communications that say, please try to reduce the amount of driving that you do. And I think it would be just an incredible opportunity for RTD to be able to offer a month or more of fare-free transit during that time. Fare-free transit is not going to solve all of our problems. And in fact, I recognize fully it will be challenging for you all to meet that. You have plenty of other things on your plate, but I encourage you to consider taking this big step and diving into this program. I do think it will result in an increase in ridership at a time when I think we really all want to be recruiting people back to ride transit. We've seen some successful programs around the country, most recently in Utah in February. I also think this provides a wonderful opportunity for our whole region to work together, from local government leaders to businesses to nonprofits like my own, having something that we can all get behind, like a fare-free transit program, is something that I think would allow all of us to work together at a time when, again, I think oftentimes people have been siloed. This bill is not perfect. I wish it was even more money and support for you all to do this program, but I'm hoping that you still support it, because I think anything we can do to pull down state dollars to support operating and fare reduction costs for you all would be an important step forward. And just know there are groups like mine and many others who are ready to assist in whatever way we can. If you take this bold step forward, we all recognize we cannot succeed as a region without RTD succeeding. And I think this is an opportunity for all of us to come together. And I'm really excited to try to organize lots of different groups and businesses and others to support you all as you move forward. So I encourage you to support that bill, and let's get it through the legislature. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. Are there any other speakers?
Yes, we have Molly McKinley.
Ms. McKinley, please state your name and give us your comments, please.
Good evening, board members. Molly McKinley, and I'm with the Denver Streets Partnership. I'm also here, like Danny, in support of Senate Bill 180. I'm a frequent transit rider and an asthmatic, so this bill also feels personal to me, and as do all of the efforts to improve air quality in the region right now at the legislature. As you know, reducing vehicle miles traveled and increasing public transit are key to addressing our air quality and climate crises. And at the Denver Streets Partnership, we're really glad to see the governor, legislators, CDOT, and you at RTD coming together on this bill. We're excited about the opportunities that this bill provides to expand access to public transit through free service in the Denver region. The poor air quality in the region impacts all of us, but disproportionately impacts low-income communities and communities of color. We've seen that these communities have higher rates of asthma, other respiratory diseases, and as we've seen recently, because of the underlying conditions, higher rates of COVID-19. So our current transportation system negatively impacts people's health and quality of life, but it doesn't have to be this way. So we support this bill and the other proposals to improve air quality. We, like Danny said, recognize that this is just a first step, and it must be a first step of many towards using public transit as a means to addressing our air quality and climate crises. We agree that reducing or eliminating fares altogether is a critical part of making transit more accessible, but has limited value if the bus only comes once every 30 or 60 minutes or not at all on evenings and weekends. So just want to thank all of you for any of you who've worked on this bill so far, and hope to see you all supporting this bill.
Thank you, Ms. McKinley. Are there any other speakers?
There are no other speakers in the queue.
Great. We'll move on to our recommended action items. We have two action items on the agenda tonight listed as items Roman 4 actions A and B. The first action is for the Board of Directors to adopt resolution number blank series of 2022 regarding the board's commitment to regional stakeholder partnership to ensure that the transit user experience across RTD's system is reflective of the agency's mission of making lives better through connections. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Rivera Malpieri.
I have Rivera Malpieri as the movant and Director Broom as the second. I would like to ask General Manager Johnson to present any pertinent information regarding this action item to the board. Ms. Johnson.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair. It's good to be with all of you. I am Deborah Johnson, the General Manager and CEO of the Regional Transportation District. As public transit is interwoven into the fabric of the communities it serves, when a community is disrupted by the actions of individuals, so too is its transit system. Suffice to say, a surge in criminal activity, and in particular, a notable increase in the sale and use of illegal drugs across the Denver metro area, as well as across the nation, has created significant and complex societal impacts to communities, as well as public spaces and services, including public transit, as evidenced by the events that transpired just this morning at a Brooklyn subway station. We all have witnessed the harm caused by these unlawful and unwelcome activities. Moreover, many of the individuals who engage in the sale and use of illegal drugs also experience mental health, housing, financial, and prior legal complications, creating additional challenges for them. And for one reason or another, many of these individuals have found their way to Denver Central Core, and in particular to Denver Union Station and its bus concourse. I extend my sincere appreciation to you, Mr. Chair and Director Rivera Malpieri, for your support and collaboration in bringing this recommended action for your consideration this evening. As I have said before, RTD cannot solve these societal issues alone. Beginning in December of 2021, I began to regularly engage with Denver Mayor Hancock's Deputy Chief of Staff to identify solutions and next steps. And through our conversations came the Reclaiming Denver Union Station Steering Committee, which has been instrumental in charting a path forward. The steering committee identified subcommittees to engage in specific subject areas such as policing and enforcement, public health, communications and community engagement, and CPTED, which stands for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. Through the Reclaiming Denver Union Station Steering Committee, the agency's partnership with officials from the City and County of Denver, as well as ATU 1001, has created robust opportunities to share solutions, explore novel strategies, and develop holistic responses to the unwelcome activities that have become prevalent, not just in the surrounding Denver Union Station area, but throughout the region. Through these efforts, RTD has begun to implement significant changes to the operations and design of the bus concourse and surrounding areas, which will culminate in the creation of paid fare areas. On April 3rd, the RTD Transit Police Division began to deploy policing security impact teams that have been deployed on bus, rail, and at facilities. The work of the Reclaiming Denver Union Station Steering Committee has also leveraged significant criminal justice and public health campaigns that have yielded significant positive results and have begun to restore a more welcoming environment on the Denver Union Station campus. One such public health campaign to be launched this week for the purpose of providing behavioral health and support services in and around Denver Union Station. This campaign will include representation from the Department of Housing Stability, the Denver Public Library, and RTD's own mental health clinicians and homeless outreach coordinator. This model with the City and County of Denver is one that can be replicated in various forms throughout RTD's 2,342 square mile service area. Though I'd be remiss not to point out that one municipality's approach may not be suitable for another location because the challenges presented and resources available to address those challenges may not align. While every municipality has certainly been impacted by a myriad of societal issues, and each must rise to the occasion to mobilize forces to mitigate the unwelcome activities associated, a one-size-fits-all approach will likely not work for all communities involved. As elected officials, each representing a vast constituency of over 200,000 residents, you as board members have a unique voice within the communities you represent and are able to identify, amplify, and address concerns with fellow electeds. This resolution will serve as the board's collective statement to the region that each of you is committed to engaging in stakeholder partnerships with local office holders with the shared goal of providing a welcoming transit environment throughout the region for RTD employees and customers, as well as adjacent residents, businesses, and visitors through coordinated security, legal, and social health and human service efforts. RTD must continue to be a committed partner in these efforts, but the agency must also rely on local support from the communities we serve. I thank each of you for your commitment to make lives better through connections and showcase the value of the Regional Transportation District to the community. I will yield the floor to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam General Manager. I'm going to go next to Director Rivera Malpiatti, and perhaps you can shed some light on this with your comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the RTD Board of Directors, because this is our opportunity to stand up as leaders for the region. I've been spending a lot of time at Denver Union Station. And one of the things that I want to share with all of you is that this is much bigger than an RTD issue. This is a societal issue that we need to join forces with all of our jurisdictions and key stakeholders. I really appreciate Danny Katz and Molly's comments. I'm going to ask them to join with us to ask municipalities and jurisdictions to join with us to come up with solutions together. It's going to take the entire village. I want to share with the board that I spent some time with Chief Paul Pazin from the Denver Police Department. And he and I spent a lot of time, in fact, with you, Mr. Chair, sharing with us the numbers and the escalation that they are now averaging 1 death by fentanyl a day. That's just the average. We all know the stories, they're awful. This afternoon, there was a major fentanyl bust in Adams County with 60,000 pills. We've had a beautiful toddler lose their life, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old. People are buying fentanyl online for $3 a tab. This is gotten into crucial areas of distress for the entire community. I want to ask my fellow board members to join with me to do a walkthrough at Denver Union Station by district, however you would like to do it. I'll be calling each board member and asking you to invite your key stakeholders who can make policy decisions to join you so that we can come together for solutions for the entire district. This is not just a Denver issue. This is permeating throughout the entire region. And I think this is our opportunity to work together, to show strong leadership, and to ask for the support that we absolutely need for mental health and security services so that we do provide safe and reliable service. I cannot begin to tell you that I've heard from board members being on our transit service with people smoking fentanyl, and not just them, but constituents. This really is an issue of crisis at this point. And I am pleased that the union has joined with us to work together for solutions. So, Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would like to contact every board member and invite them to go for a walkabout at Denver Union Station and have the pertinent people there to brief all of them on what is happening, what the long and short-term solutions are from RTD, but what are the resources we need to make this a complete success for the entire region. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank our general manager and her team for their outstanding leadership in trying to get in front of this huge societal issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Rivera Malpiatti. And it is an eye opener when you go down there, and quite interesting. And if I may, Director Rosenthal, before I go to you, just a couple things. You know, a resolution is not an action item. I mean, it's not a it's a call to arms, basically, and to shed light on what's going on. It doesn't spell out what the action will be, but talks about what it can be. And I think the work that you, Director Rivera Malpiedi, and General Manager Johnson have done at Denver Union Station can be a guide, not a perfect template, but a guide for what can happen in other districts. For example, not too long ago, Director Bouquet and General Manager Johnson and I had an hour-long Zoom meeting with Lone Tree Mayor Jackie Millay to talk about their concerns at the end of line station in Lone Tree and some of the similar issues they're experiencing that we experience here in Denver Union Station. We've begun that conversation and that dialogue with Lone Tree Mayor Jackie Millay, who is eager to assist and lend support and lend resources to help RTD accomplish the goals that we set forth in this resolution. And this is something that each director really that is impacted by this and affected by these types of problems undertake with their stakeholders, with General Manager Johnson and whoever else you want to bring along to address these issues. With that said, Director Rosenthal, I'll go to you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and really appreciate your work on this resolution, and of course, previous Chair, Director Rivera Malpiedi, for your leadership as well on this resolution, and certainly leading this board on these issues raised in this resolution. And of course, our General Manager and your team for working collaboratively in the community with lots of stakeholders. I think that is, it shows the tremendous work that you have put in. And despite the distance we still have to travel, we've come a ways. And I think that I think that certainly we can certainly see that as well. And I appreciate your efforts. So I definitely support this resolution. I think it's very helpful to us to say our statement of where we're at. And certainly I hear the community emailing me, calling me, telling me in person about some of these issues. So I can certainly echo that they are still a concern. However, I can also see the actions taken. A question for perhaps the General Manager, and I believe Director Malpiedi mentioned this, to make sure that we are motivating some of our partners in the community. I'm curious as to who will get a copy of this resolution. I think it hopefully should be distributed fairly widely, not just in the media, but I think perhaps the governor's office, the legislature, city councils, mayors might all benefit from knowing the efforts that, as mentioned earlier, the general manager, her team, and also the will and the sense of this RTD board. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rosenthal, for those comments. Director Deschel, you're next.
Actually, that was a question.
Oh, was that a question?
Yeah. So so how are we going to get this resolution out there, and in order to make sure that people know that actually we passed this? In other words,
you bet. General Manager Johnson, would you care to address that?
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to Director Rosenthal for the question. As I said in my opening comments, I'm amenable as it relates to the dissemination. I look to you all as a policy body, recognizing that we have been working with a plethora of different community stakeholders. This is an opportunity for the board collectively. So if you would like to advise me on who you would like it disseminated to, I'm more than willing to have staff assist in that effort. But at this juncture, recognizing the staff has done yeoman's work as it relates to engaging at a staff level, I look to the board, and perhaps as related to Director Rivera Malpiedi's statements, I know she and I have been working closely, and perhaps she will lead that charge, and she's nodding her head. So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I would ask if we could yield the floor to Director Rivera Malpiedi.
Thank you. Director Rivera Malpiedi, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, General Manager. I'm going to respectfully ask that each one of us as board members get the resolution and send it to the folks we think need to see it. I think that's part of our responsibility as leaders in this arena. So I will be sending it out in addition to all of my local elected officials and nonprofit organizations. You know your community better than anyone else. who should read this and who could possibly come to the table to help us come up with some solutions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for those comments. Director Rosenthal, does that address your question?
It sure does. So thank you very much. And thank you, Director Monpiede as well.
You bet. Thanks so much. Director Deschel, you're up.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Director Rivera-Malpiede, our GM and staff, and Chair Busick for your work here. But my question is hopefully a shorter one, which is, it would be great to get Director Rivera-Malpiede that data that you had referenced to be able to share that out, and whether we lean on our local lobbying group to prep that into sort of a ledge one pager that we see go around the Capitol, or, I know that we organize those groups. So if there's a way that we can get it into a pretty sort of one pager, because I find that to be incredibly compelling. And of course, we'll send the resolution in the interim, but I think that would be helpful and appreciated. I'm happy to help in whatever way makes sense.
Thank you. Was that a question, or you're good on that? All right, good deal. Thank you. Director Lewis, you're next, please.
Mr. Chair, if I
Our
may,
general manager. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Sorry, Director Lewis.
yes, thank you so
GM
much.
Johnson, please.
Yes, thank you. And I apologize for talking over you. I know it's
No.
kind of awkward in this virtual, so I apologize for that. But I did want to direct a response to Director Deschel's comments. We are engaging with our legislative delegation, and on a recurring basis, working with our lobbyists and Michael Davies, we disseminate pertinent information to them as it relates to what's happening at RTD. So I just wanted to ensure that you all were cognizant of that fact, because we intend to provide them with this information. But more specifically, that's at the state level, and to the point that Director Rivera-Malpiede said, we're looking at the local level as it relates to your engagement. So I just did not want to miss the opportunity to shed light on what we are doing here as staff. Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification. And Director Deschel, thanks for those comments as well. Director Lewis, I think it's your turn now.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually had a similar question regarding the data. I just wanted to, this is a question of clarity regarding the 1 death per day for fentanyl. Was that on our system, or was that within the city and county of Denver?
That was in the city and within the city and county of Denver, according to the police chief.
Okay. Do we have data, general manager or anyone on your staff, that we might be able to take a peek at regarding the occurrences in which criminal activity is happening, where some of these things might be substance use, or some of the issues that you all might be dealing with is mental health occurrences?
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes, please do.
So recognizing that we do have a cross-coordinated effort with Reclaiming DUS, and we have Interim Chief Martin Gano working in tandem with Lieutenant Ferris of District 6 that incorporates the Denver Union Station campus, there is data that we have available that we're compiling, recognizing that we use secondary officers, we use our Transit Watch app. We're in the process of compiling that as we go forward, to the point that you raised regarding the fentanyl usage. 1 pill can kill, and there's 1 death per day. I did receive that information as well at a briefing that was provided to us in the mayor's office. So I will circle back as relates to the data that we can provide, because I don't want to overpromise, because we're relying upon our partners at the city and county of Denver, as well as other police departments that are collecting data going forward. And if Chief Martin Gano is on the call, Chief, if I could have you speak to that to clarify anything that would enhance the response, I greatly would appreciate it, sir.
Thanks, CEO. I just wanted to clarify the question you were, Director Lewis, you were asking if there's a correlation between mental health issues and the drug activity?
No, if I might repeat it, would that be okay, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please do.
Thank you. No, I was actually more curious of what kind of data that you all had. It sounds more, at least it's my interpretation, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that it's more anecdotal at this point, stories from individuals. And so I was just curious of the hard data that you might have from a quantitative and qualitative perspective, quite frankly.
Yeah, I will get that data for you. We have all the numbers that have been generated by Denver Police Department for the Union Station area. So once we get the updated numbers, we actually have a meeting tomorrow in regards to their latest efforts. So I will get that to our CEO to distribute. Thanks.
Thank you. Is it fair to assume that that data is broken down by occurrences, but also what activity that the activity would be tagged to or logged in a specific way? So like drug use or mental health or et cetera, et cetera.
So the data that we receive from Denver Police Department is going to be more of the criminal citations that they issue related to drug offenses. We do have our internal mental health clinicians that we receive data from them quarterly. So I will reach out and see if they could, give us an updated number before the quarter runs out here in regards to contacts they make in relation to mental health issues. But like I said, Denver PD is going to give us criminal statistics based off of contacts they made and criminal citations that were issued.
Great, thank you so much. And I would assume that go ahead, General Manager.
I was just also going to add that we do have our Transit Watch app, which we have been encouraging people to utilize. So that is a form of data analytics that we could use, because we also just recently incorporated a field that talks about, drug activity into that program. And so we can assess that data as well, because as I mentioned in several instances when I was engaging with the media, the intent of us leveraging that and encouraging usage is so we can use data to make informed decisions as we talk about deployment. So that's another aspect that could provide a cross-jurisdictional understanding of where we are as opposed to just Denver PD.
Thank you so much for that, because I actually am a bit more interested in the internal data that we might have for the occurrences that are happening on our system. Not to say that the DPD information isn't important, but I think it is, which is true for other police departments, but I'm more specifically interested in the data that we might be collecting as an agency. So one of the, Chair Rivera, or Director Rivera Malpiedi, is I think about the Harm Reduction Center as we're having a conversation about these issues. And so just wanting to make sure that they're closely involved. And then to your point, Director Busick, or Chair Busick, excuse me, mixed you two up today. To your point, Chair Busick, around this really being about commitments and not about action. I am curious, and I appreciate the commitments. I am curious as to if we will have a follow-up conversation, or if we'll get regular reporting or updates as a board on kind of what the progress is with this commitment.
Yeah, and I'll speak on behalf of the general manager because it's her job. But yeah, absolutely. This is top of mind for all of us, because it is such an important and critical issue facing RTD. So we will definitely be having regular updates on this issue. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And then finally, I just want to say what this commitment is not saying is that we are criminalizing folks who may be having concerns around poverty, right? We're not criminalizing folks who are dealing with substance abuse, and we're not criminalizing folks who might have mental health things that they are dealing with. And so I just want to state that. I know you said that at the beginning of this, General Manager Johnson, but I think just to say it again, that this is not about over-policing or criminalizing activities that aren't criminal activities, that the intention is to have a comprehensive approach to safety as an agency, so that safety, as it's defined by the myriad of stakeholders that we have, is actualized. So I do appreciate this.
If I can, Mr. Chair, I just want to say to Director Lewis, I've said this all along, we're approaching this, at least from my vantage point with my team, with firm compassion. I think that is the operative phrase, is firm compassion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Lewis. Thank you, General Manager Johnson. Thank you, Chief Martingano. Director Tisdale, you're up next. But before you start, can you tell me the Transit Watch app, when you have that, what did you used to say about that?
If you have the Transit Watch app, you'll never ride alone. And I think that's critical. And actually, I'll start with that comment, because at the APTA Legislative Conference, I was speaking with the communications director for BART in San Francisco, and we were comparing Transit Watch apps. And she was very impressed that we had included drug activity in our Transit Watch app, which definitely puts us cutting edge on agencies around the country that are using that. Speaking of around the country, I do want to put this in perspective because I know that there are people outside of RTD who ultimately either will view this meeting or will read about it and say, oh, what's Denver doing? What's going on with RTD? I want to point out that our challenges are not unique. This is, in fact, a national problem that transit agencies across the country, actually around the globe, are dealing with. The APTA CEO, the American Public Transportation Association's Chief Executive Officers Conference, was held in Denver this weekend. And I took the APTA Vice Chair, Kevin Holzendorf, on a tour of Denver Union Station because he had never spent any time at Union Station. He'd gone through it once several years back when we had an APTA conference here in Denver, and he wanted to see what we had done. So I very happily obliged his interest and took him on a tour of the station, the commuter rail platform, the entire bus concourse, and the light rail station, and the pavilions above the light rail, above the bus concourse, so that he could see what we were dealing with. And he confirmed to me that they have similar issues at JTA, the Jacksonville Transportation Authority down in Florida, and he inquired as to what our plans were. So I shared some of that with him as I knew it, but I know that the JTA CEO, Nat Ford, was in town also for this meeting, and obviously knows our CEO, Deborah Johnson, very well, and he'll be in touch, I know, to follow up on what we're doing, because I think in large part we are helping to lead the way, and the essential part of it is for us to collaborate and cooperate with all of the governmental entities and agencies throughout our very large region so that we can come up with a good plan to address this very troubling issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Chisnell, for those comments. Madam Secretary, you're next.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and all the work that's been done by Director Rivera Malpiedi and staff. You know, you've said this is not an action item, but it is a commitment to action. And I think that's what's essential for us to recognize our responsibility. I really appreciate the intent to engage the board in this effort, you know, because it is so important. I would suggest, rather than each board member sending it to people who they think of, the resolution, if it passes, and I'm assuming it will, that the RTD board, as a full board, send this out to every jurisdiction, every county, every municipality, as a full board action. And then in the cover letter, state that their board members will be in contact with them to put this into a true action. I think that would be more meaningful than each board member sending it out to people they think of. Plus, there's a lot of overlap in counties in particular. So that's one suggestion for what we do after it passes. Another one is, I really like the idea of an invitation to a tour of Union Station, because that is so important to all of us. It is our hub, but the spokes are also important. And we need to reassure people that we're thoughtful enough that we're not just going to push people away from the station itself and onto bus lines and rail lines. And in connection with that, that's kind of what what is RTD itself already planning on doing. I believe we've gotten a great briefing tonight on that. I'd like to see that in writing, and also the data requested by many people. But I would also like to see not only what is RTD already doing, what is still needed, what is it willing to do in partnership with the jurisdictions, so that the board members have a firm basis when they're talking to jurisdictional stakeholders about what we can offer, what we're looking for. I think that would be much more meaningful than going out without that information. So I would also appreciate the briefing that we're going to get to include that. That said, I think this is a terrific effort. It's going to be a metro-wide effort that everybody is going to be aware of. And I hope it bears fruit and that we can be really proud of our success in this area. So thank you all.
Thank you, Secretary Sloan. I'll ask you to work offline with Director Rivera Malpiedi and General Manager Johnson with regard to the dissemination of the resolution. Thanks. Next, we have Second Vice Chair Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am really appreciative of the Transit Watch app and being able to use it as a tool for collecting data. I think that's really important, and I think that's an important part of our messaging to not only our, some of our stakeholders, but our riders as well. I think that's really an important piece. And I know we're talking about reclaiming Denver Union Station, and I was pleased to hear that Chair Busick and Director Bouquet met with Mayor Jackie Millay to address issues down in Lone Tree. I don't know if this should be directed to General Manager CEO Johnson or Chief Martinago, but I'm very interested also in understanding some of the data around Civic Center Station, because I have a number of constituents who bring that to my attention, the safety issues associated with that on a regular basis. So that's all I have. Thank you for this good work, Director Rivera Malpiedi and Ms. Johnson. I just really applaud you on all your efforts to try and make this a safer place. Thanks.
Thank you. And Ms. Johnson, do you have a response? Is that why your hand is up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, Director Catlin, thank you very much for your comments. So as we look at this holistically, I don't want to leave the impression this is just a laser focus on Denver Union Station, recognizing that this is an intermodal hub and that serves as the core, more or less, of the system as a whole, recognizing cross coordination with commuter rail, light rail, and bus. We'd be remiss not to focus on that because those are the spokes, as Director Sloan had referenced. And so in as such, we will provide you with data. I want you to know that I am amenable to working with anyone who you all put forward. I will support you on that effort. As Director Bouquet knows, he talked to me some time ago in this public forum, and I said I'm more than willing with, take meetings, and I have done that as well. So one last piece of this I want you all to know is that we are creating a webpage that will chronicle the efforts that we are doing as it relates to making this a safe environment. There was a recommendation to put forward a fact sheet, and I came back to that individual and said that's static. What we're going to do is chronicle what we're doing as we look at improvements collectively. When it comes time to do interviews or there's videos and things of the like, there will be a central repository, for lack of a better term, where we can direct people so they can keep us accountable, and we will put that information up in a very transparent format. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager Johnson. Director Williams.
Thank you, Chair Busick. And thanks to everybody for the work. I want to go back a little bit to where Director Kaplan was coming from, because I've been riding around in parts of Denver that I haven't been in before. And what I see is that in many ways, downtown Denver is a scary place, and it never was before. I have had interesting encounters with people at 18th in California and on the number 6 bus and places where I never used to. So it is not Union Station. It's not Civic Center Station. It's indigenous, unfortunately, to the downtown area of our city at the moment, which RTD is a big part of. And I'm really happy to know that we are engaged, as is the city and county, and hopefully all of our fellow elected public officials who work at the state capitol, which is in the middle of the area that we're talking about. So I just want to thank Director Rivera-Malpiedi and all of you for being engaged, involved public officials here in our wonderful city and our state capitol, and to realize that it's not simply, as General Manager Johnson has said, a Denver Union Station problem. It's a systemic problem. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Williams. Director Lewis, I see your hand up again.
I would just like to add that my constituents along the A line would probably appreciate an update regarding the catalytic converter thefts that have been happening. So just say that for the sake of the record.
Sounds good. Thanks for that. Any further discussion on this action item? Seeing no hands raised, I'll call for the vote. Are there any no votes on this action item? Okay, seeing none, this action item passes unanimously 15-0. I'm going to move on to the second action item, which is for the Board of Directors to adopt a support position on SB 22-180 concerning programs to reduce ground level ozone through increased use of transit as the bill was introduced. Do we have a motion?
So moved, Director Williams.
Second.
Williams
Second.
and Director Broom. Director Williams is the movement and Director Broom is the second. I would like to ask General Manager Johnson or Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer, to present any pertinent information regarding this action item to the board.
So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Before I yield the floor to Michael Davies, the agency's Government Relations Officer, in an effort to manage expectations with the staff's recommendation, I want to ensure that there is mutual understanding that your consideration and possible approval does not constitute the initiation of a fare free program. If this bill were effectuated into law, it would create a grant program within the Colorado Energy Office for RTD and other Colorado transit agencies to apply for funding to implement a minimum of 30 days a fare-free transit service program during ozone season. This is very analogous to the federal bipartisan infrastructure law that appropriated funding. That law did not establish eligibility criteria for the federal discretionary grant programs. Hence, before I can implement any fare-free program, be it 12 days, 13 days, or 30 days, I must again come before this board with staff's recommendation for consideration of a fare-free program, as this body creates agency policy, including fare policy. Please know that ATU President Lance Logenbaum, I should say ATU 1001, President joins me in this position. The program can be implemented in light of our previous discussion with a commitment. Let me say it again, with a commitment of regional support to provide security and social, health, and human services. As RTD can't combat societal issues alone. I broached that, as Director Tisdale mentioned, the Apta CEO seminar. I spent 3 days, Friday, Saturday, well, really it equated 3 days, Friday evening, Saturday, Sunday, and half a day yesterday. And I've talked to my colleagues around the country that have instituted programs. And I know it's easy to look at data, but recognizing that there has been a large influx of issues that have basically complicated these, my ultimate obligation is to create a safe and welcoming environment for our employees without fear of looking over their shoulders. So recognizing that, I want you to understand my commitment, because I do believe in the program, but also I have an obligation to ensure that our employees basically have a safe working environment. So I wanted to state that for the record. So with that, I will now yield the floor to Mr. Davies, who can orient you to the bill as well as the staff's recommendation. So Mr. Davies, please proceed.
Yes, thank you. Hello, Chair, members of the board, Michael Davies, Government Relations Officer. I'm just going to quickly go over a summary of the bill and try not to repeat too much of what General Manager CEO Johnson said. So SB 180 does create a grant program that is housed within the Colorado Energy Office. The grant program is eligible for RTD to apply and receive up to $11 million per year. The grant will cover 80% of the cost of offering at least 30 days of fare free transit service during the ozone season of 2022 and 2023. The ozone season is defined in this bill as June 1st to August 31st. Expenses that are eligible under this grant program include replacing fare box revenue and, quote, other expenses necessary to implement the program. The bill does not define other expenses necessary to implement the program, but the bill does give a lot of discretion to the Colorado Energy Office to publish and set policy and requirements for how the grant program works. So some questions may not be able to be answered until the Colorado Energy Office actually implements this grant program. With that said, that is essentially a summary of what this legislation does. Staff is recommending a support position in alignment with the strategic priority of community value. As you all heard tonight, there was a few public comments prior, and I think that it expresses some of the community value that is out there and community support for this program. And I think it's important to note that RTD, like any transit agency, has financial constraints that limit its budget flexibility. This bill presents a unique opportunity to replace the fare revenue and experiment with fare-free transit. And so with that, I will end my comments and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. We'll go to questions and comments. Director Broom, you're first.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to mention that I was appointed and reappointed by the governor to serve on the Regional Air Quality Control Council, the RAC. And obviously, because of that, I really strongly support this. I guess I'll leave it at that. The RAC has been a strong supporter of RTD over the years. And the one thing that I remember specifically was when the Volkswagen settlement came out, they directed quite a bit of money to RTD for our programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Broom, and thank you for your service on the RAC. Director Rosenthal, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the General Manager and Mr. Davies on your work on this bill, as well as our lobbyist, Brenda Berry McKenna. And of course, thank you to the bill sponsors and the legislature for sponsoring this bill. I'm obviously fully in support. It's a great idea, and I believe it hopefully will help have folks use transit rather than use their vehicles. I do have a couple of questions. So in terms of the 30 days, I was wondering, does that have to be concurrent? So it has to go for 30 days straight through, or can we break it up for 2 weeks and have fare free, and then maybe a month later go fare free? So how would that be situated with the number of days?
General Manager Johnson.
To the point that was raised by Mr. Davies, we have yet to receive guidance. Quite naturally, this needs to be effectuated and will go through the Energy Office. We've yet to know the eligibility criteria. Mr. Davies, would you like to add to that?
Yes, thank you. I don't have much more to add, but the bill just states at least 30 days is the language that's included in this bill. It doesn't, there is no reference to concurrence, a concurrent 30 days. So that would probably have to be clarified. My understanding is that the intent behind the authors is to offer 30 days consecutively.
Okay, so perhaps we can get that clarified. I appreciate that. And then the other thing that I'd like to bring up, with the fire season starting particularly earlier and going later, and of course, it's not just here in Colorado, we're also the recipient of fire smoke coming from California and other places. And of course, ozone is not just about fire, it's also about vehicles and power plants and things like that. So perhaps my suggestion is also have the bill sponsors and the Energy Office also look at moving up, and instead of June 1 to make it like, May 1, or make it instead of August 31st, September 31st, October 31st, to lengthen the time that we are able to take advantage of this program due to the fact that ozone could happen, poor ozone could happen before and after this time period, especially as we go into climate change. I think we need that kind of flexibility. My suggestion. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments, Director Rosenthal. Secretary Sloan.
Yes, thank you again. And I too support this bill. And that right now I'm asking for a little more information on what is the meaning of metro area support, in terms of understandable concerns about problems on the buses and the rail trains with non-paying customers who might not have the commitment to follow the rules. So I understand the need for metro-wide support. We've just discussed that essentially, but I would appreciate some more specifics on, is this asking for some type of formal agreement, such as an MOU or an IGA? And what percentage of the jurisdictions would need to be willing to say, we'll pitch in and agree to support? And what types of support should they be committed to? It seems like that needs to be fleshed out. Thank you.
Thank you. General Manager Johnson, do you have a response?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you very kindly. I think I would be remiss not to reference the public commenters that we heard at the beginning of the meeting, recognizing that Mr. Davies and I, have been working with SWEEP and COPERG, and there was the comment by Mr. Katz where we're going to get the business community together and we're going to have people support, right? So as we go forward, we're going to identify what that support mechanism is. For instance, when we met with Mayor Millay of Lone Tree, for instance, she was saying, what could we do with the health and human services piece? So basically it's a clear-cut nexus to what the previous discussion was entailing as relates to the commitment going forward, because quite naturally, if in fact we create an untenable situation whereby it is an unsafe area per se, if in fact this came to fruition and the board did grant me the authority to institute a fare free program, safety is top of mind, and we have to ensure, as my understanding, what happened during the course of the fare free system that was put in place during the pandemic, we have to ensure that there is a health and safety component involved therein. So we will be in the process of working this through with our partners. And Mr. Davies, would you like to add any additional information to that?
No, I think that largely covers it. And I think from a staff perspective, the intent of whatever we can recommend to implement is ultimately a program that attracts and retains customers, and having a welcoming environment is a crucial part of that process, I think.
Great, thanks for those responses. Secretary Sloan, was that good? Are you through with their?
That's all I have.
Okay.
I believe more details do need to work out. The intent of the program is to encourage ridership, improve our air, but this other piece seems very amorphous to me about support of partners.
I'm sure that'll be fleshed out over the coming months, but thanks for those comments. Treasurer Whitmore, please go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do appreciate CEO Johnson, briefing us at least on our two-step process of this action. There's a myriad of steps for staff and our partners. This situation with ozone is serious, and we know it's real, and we need to do what we can to help those with asthma and those that are suffering through these times. That being said, this whole process is fraught with challenges. We've heard many of them tonight, and it will be definitely interesting to see how this works as we move through it. But I truly believe it is a worthy effort that is fully justified for a number of reasons. If nothing else, as Mr. Davies has mentioned, this gives us a good look at a fare-free scenario that's not tied to COVID, that helps us to understand how that may or may not work. I am concerned about security issues. I had a conversation with the North Metro mayor on Friday where, her statement was, I don't have any security surplus whatsoever right now. So those are kind of deals that we're going to have to work through, and I'm sure we can work through that. I do appreciate the work that will happen, and that the experience that CEO Johnson has had in other places will be very, very helpful. So with that, I will quote one of my favorite state senators: "Good bill, vote yes."
Thank you, Treasurer Whitmore. Director Deschel.
Thank you so much. Excuse me, Mr. Chair, Michael Davies and Ms. Johnson, and I know Director Geisinger has been doing some work as well behind the scenes to help get this through. And for clarity, I'm ultimately a yes, but I also want to be clear that I think this process is how Band-Aid policy gets made, policy that doesn't address the root cause. If the root cause or the root goal was to decrease GHG emissions, then the state could have come to RTD and said, I could throw you $28 million. What's the most effective way to reduce GHG emissions? If the goal was to increase transit ridership, the legislature similarly could have come to us and said, we have X dollars in the budget. You're transit experts. I'm not. What's the best way to improve public transit? And so while there'd be a lot of things that would need to happen for me to be opposed to free fares, I just want to lead out with some clarity that this is an election year. And instead of us being the punching bag, at least so far, we happen to maybe stand to benefit, which is great. But it would be great for those listening in to really think about the way in which we make policy when we're serving communities, as opposed to being prescriptive for something that's going to catch a headline and sound good, but might not really move the needle. I think the second piece and second component is I have genuine concerns that we, without the right messaging, that people are going to think they're going to have show up and go service that comes every 10 minutes, which just isn't our reality. And are we inviting greater criticism of RTD's service and unfair, disgruntled customers in this? I mean, there's a lot to be fleshed out and not a lot of time. It says it's for the state's fiscal year 22-23 budget, unless I'm misreading that. And if the state session ends on June 15th, unless the governor signs this bill right away, in order for staff to have the time to bring something back, for us to approve it, that really means we're looking at free fares in August. Realistically, right? Today is April 15th. I don't know, am I misreading that for this year? That if this were to pass, the earliest we could do, if this doesn't get signed until mid-July, early June, what's the earliest it could come to the board for consideration to still fit within the time frame prescribed?
Yes, Director Deschel, I think you raise a good point on the logistics of this bill and the logistics of implementing this program. I think we have to just wait to see if this bill passes, when it gets signed, and then following on that, when the Colorado Energy Office actually publishes a notice of available funding.
If I may add on, Mr. Chair, to Director
Yes,
Deschel.
please. Ms. Johnson.
So in my opening comments, as I said, we would have to come back to you to institute a fair program. And while there is a grant opportunity readily available, I think it's incumbent upon the board to decide the level of commitment as relates to a fare free program, recognizing that we had discussions last fall relative to this agency being committed, that basically came out in discussions in August that we had put monies aside to at least fund 12 days. So the point of the matter is, where is the appetite holistically for the board of directors in instituting any type of fare-free program? This is just supplemental money that could be utilized to fund that endeavor. So I think holistically, the team and I had been looking at the June timeframe going forward with a commencement date. So the enactment of said law that would create this grant program would provide additional parameters for you all to make the decision about the duration, if that's the desire in which you'd like to go. I hope that addresses your question, Director Deschel.
Yeah, I think if it's at all possible, just making sure that we have the flexibility that if the governor if this isn't quick to pass and the governor isn't quick to sign, that we can still get this done, right? That we can still have 2 years of fare-free programs if that's the intent. Because, my concern is logistically and again, right, or do we as a board decide to take the chance that the money's going to be there? Because I am genuinely concerned that we won't have the time to really do it right if the board only, and maybe it's already ready to go. But if there's any way we can work in some wiggle room to push an extra year if the DOE doesn't promulgate rules on time, because I don't know that it's a prudent fiscal decision to approve free funding when we're expected to get 80% of it if the rules aren't out in time for us to know we're actually going to get that money.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can add one clarifying point.
Yeah, please do.
So, Director Deschel, when you talk about being ready to go, as I shared before this forum, the team and I have been working since the fall in reference to the logistical aspect in working with our operations teams as relates to all modalities that we provide, as well as working with our union partners. The only trepidation I would have is our people power problem, recognizing what you said. And so that's why we were taking a judicious approach relative to a shorter duration of time going forward. But from an operational vantage point, we have done the groundwork to ensure that we're ready. So I just wanted you to understand when we talk about if we'd be ready to go with this program, because at the outset, we would need, I believe, a month. We would like to advertise and set the parameters to manage those expectations, to your point. So I just wanted to ensure that this full body understood that component of it. Thank you very much for indulging me.
And thank you for indulging me. And my last question is, do we have the 20%? It says they'll fund 80, but we have to come up with 20. And maybe that's not an appropriate question for this forum, but do we have it confidently?
If I may, Mr. Chair. So,
Yes.
Thank you. Recognizing my previous comments relative to making the commitment as related to 12 days, when you factor in and you do the math at $340,000 or $350,000 times 12, we would basically have the opportunity to have those monies going forward. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all for indulging me, and I'm finished.
Thanks, Director Deschel. First Vice Chair Geisinger.
Thank you very much. And yeah, thanks. I really appreciate Ms. Johnson's comments there. I think that staff has been working hard, Ms. Johnson and Michael Davies and others. You know, I think the target generally is August, and you know, we've been. This is not. While I appreciate your thoughts, Director Deschel, in terms of, you know, how they might have approached it, and I think it was approached sort of you know, brought to the agency. I think that the agency and Ms. Johnson and Mr. Davies have been very involved in these conversations. You know, this could be a really great thing in terms of bringing ridership back. In terms of our 20%, you know, if it raises fares, that will help bring some of that money back. When the Utah Transit Agency, UTA, put this in effect in February, ridership was up 58% on Saturdays over January, 16% on weekdays, and 32% on Sundays. I say that and celebrate it at the same time. I share the concerns that Ms. Johnson has mentioned about, you know, safety and security and workforce, and just really want the agency to be able to put its best foot forward. I think that working together with our partners is, you know, a huge step towards doing that. You heard Danny Katz and Molly McKinley. The Colorado Forum has met with us twice. The business community is interested. I think there is a lot of interest, but I agree, you know, we have to make sure that people understand we are making a lot of changes. I think staff has done a great job in terms of starting to all of the things we went through earlier around DUS and the efforts we're doing. Those are still going to be in progress, but this is an important step, and I think it's an important step in terms of working with the state, the funding from the state, having as Michael Davies said, the unique opportunity to have them help mostly fund this free fare test. And if you didn't see the news today, EPA moved just today to downgrade the metro area from serious violator of the Clean Air Act for ground level ozone to a severe violator. And that brings a lot of consequences with it. It means also that it's a much more, it's harmful in itself. It's its own safety issue. And areas with a higher concentration of Latino residents, the news said, experienced a bigger bump in recent years, and a trend that's expected to continue. We had 48 days that violated the Clean Air Act ozone standards. So I think this is a very good step. The timing is tough, and it's going to take a lot of work. And I think, you know, I hope we move forward and give it a go. I will be a yes vote. Thanks.
Thank you, First Vice Chair Geisinger. Director Davidson, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep it brief. Really just a comment. Appreciate Director Deschel, your comments about, you know, the effectiveness of addressing climate change, and hopefully we'll have more opportunities, whether it's ridership or climate change, to weigh in on these types of things and, you know, lend our expertise. I just wanted to call out briefly, Mr. Davies, I really appreciated the comment. It was brief about this being experimentation with free fares, and the experiment kind of jumps out, and the extent to which this actually does help with ridership or help with climate change, and perhaps they're hand in hand in terms of encouraging more ridership on transit. I'd be very curious, and I'm sure this is the plan, given that we are becoming more data driven, which I appreciate under the leadership of you, General Manager and CEO Johnson, that it'd be very useful to look at the type of data that Director Geisinger, you just brought up after the fact. If we were to move forward with something like this, what happened to ridership? Is there anything we can compare to, you know, vehicle miles traveled during that time frame, and really understand, you know, did this have the intended effect? So just wanted to call. I appreciate the the comments. I've heard a lot of conversation. There's a number of debates out there about free transit versus not, and what's right for some areas versus not, and whether these types of things have impact on climate. So really just a comment. Happy if there's a reaction out there, but just to say, I hope that if we do go forward with this, we'll do a really thorough analysis of the data and what happened across multiple systems after the fact. So thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thanks, Director Davidson. Director Tisdale, you're next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think it is important whenever we can to demonstrate our collaboration and cooperation with our fellow governmental agencies and to communicate that to them, to our riders, and to our constituents. And I think that this is one great way to achieve that goal. I hope it will be successful, and I have reason to believe that it will be. And I hope that our enthusiastic support for this will send that message loud and clear to all of those people. And I also hope that our great spirit of collaboration with the legislature will induce a spirit of reciprocity when it becomes relevant to the RTD in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for those comments, and you can only hope. Director Williams, you're next.
I hate it when I have to follow Doug. Geez, he's so fantastic. I find it very interesting, and I'd like to put this on the record, that we are looking at the two opposite ends of a coin. We are looking at all of the problems that we have with safety and security, with riders and people who are not necessarily riders in our facilities at both ends, at Denver Union Station and down in Lone Tree, who are less than desirable. But we are also looking at fare free, which nobody is stepping up to the plate to allow, also encourages more of those kinds of people in and on our system. So I am 100% in favor of anything that helps us to make transit more accessible for everyone. And fare free is one of those. But I think we need to look, as I say, at both ends of the bookends here to see if, in fact, our ridership numbers are going to be people that we would prefer to have riding, and not necessarily a 20% increase in people that we would not prefer to have riding. So just a thought. Thanks.
Thanks, Director Williams. Director Cook.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it brief too. I think, as Michael Davies has said, this is an opportunity. I'll tell you, folks out here, and generally, I've talked to the news reporting about 30 days potentially of fare-free riding, have been excited by the prospect and are already talking about joint marketing efforts. And I take advantage of that to talk also about the need to work on security associated with it. So I think this gives us an avenue for creating those bridges to identify solutions to problems that we may anticipate. So I just hope that the stance we take isn't, we'll do it if we get the support, but rather this is an opportunity. We want to do it right, so it's a good experience. Let's figure out how we can do it together. So that's my thought there. And the 30 days to me was pretty key. So thank you.
Thanks, Director Cook. Director Rosenthal, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so just real quick, I know it's my second bite at the apple here. Just looking at, so when the bill was introduced on March 25th, and then it was actually heard 4 days later in the Transportation Committee in the Senate, and then basically less than 2 weeks later, heard in Appropriations Committee, and now referred to the Committee of the Whole, the entire Senate floor. This bill is moving along fairly quickly. It doesn't sound like anybody's sitting on it. And of course, the legislature has only a month left to enact action. So I think it's moving along, and just sort of reading the tea leaves, it doesn't sound like anybody's kind of keeping it. And I fully expect the governor to sign it fairly quickly. Thank you. So especially since it was his idea, publicizing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Director Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Davies, our General Manager Johnson, will you all have the opportunity to co-create that regulation with the Energy Office?
Yes, Director Lewis, I think we'll have the opportunity to have dialogue with them. We've had a good working relationship with them up to this point in kind of crafting the concept of this bill and providing information to them. So we've had a good working relationship, and I don't think there would be any reason that we won't have that in the future.
Great. So it's possible to build in the flexibility necessary to make this work for RTD. Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thank you for those comments. And seeing no other comments, close out our discussion and take our vote. Are there any no votes on this matter? Seeing none, this matter passes by a vote of 15 in favor and 0 opposed. Next, we move on to other matters. Are there any other matters to come before the board in this special board meeting? Seeing none, I will now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Director Lewis.
Director Lewis moves and Director Tisdale seconds. Any no votes on that one? No, I don't think so. Thanks for participating. The meeting's adjourned at 6:53 p.m. Committee Chair Davidson, do we need a break before the Finance and Planning Committee meeting?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll convene 2 minutes before the top of the hour.
Thanks everyone for being here tonight at special board meeting.
Thank you. We'll reconvene in another minute. Give it another minute, just make sure we're all here. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. The Finance and Planning Committee will come to order. We are convened as of 6:59 p.m. Mountain Time. I would respectfully ask everyone attending this meeting to mute yourself unless you're recognized to speak, just as our last meeting. Thank you for joining us. As Chair Busick noted in the special board meeting, under the current circumstances, these meetings of the RTD Board of Directors will be held remotely in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare. For the immediate future, the official meetings of the Board of Directors will be held via Zoom and will be audio and video recorded. Please visit rtd-denver.com to access the recordings and unofficial meeting minutes. Directors and members of staff, for the sake of the record, if you would like to be acknowledged during tonight's proceedings, please raise your virtual hand and wait for me to call on you. Directors and staff participating by phone can also raise their hands to indicate that they would like to speak by pressing *9, and to toggle your mute settings, press *6. I will call for the roll of the Finance and Planning Committee. Director Broom.
Present.
Director Catlin.
Here.
Director Cook. Director Cook. Okay, if Director Cook joins, we'll acknowledge her. I do expect that she'll rejoin. Director Deschel.
Present.
Director Geisinger.
Here.
Director Whitmore.
Present.
And I am present. That's 6 present, 1 absent. Ms. McManus, if you wouldn't mind just noting for the record when and if Director Cook is able to rejoin us. And Ms. McManus, I'm having a hard time seeing my list here. Would you mind just noting what other directors have remained, just for the sake of the record, outside of the Finance and Planning Committee?
Yes, we have Director Tisdale, Director Williams. We have Sloan, Bouquet, Rosenthal, Catlin, Lewis, and Whitmore currently.
Thank you, Ms. McManus. And I do, for the sake of the record, see that Director Cook has rejoined. So we have all 7 committee members here. Thank you. Next, we're going to move into the public comment period. We're going to open up public comment again this evening for this committee. Those who would like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda or for the immediately preceding month. If you would wish to speak and have not already done so, you can raise your virtual hand or press *9 on your phone. Staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. If you are dialed in, press *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please do bear in mind that if you participate in this process, you are being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, your comments will need to be submitted in writing. If any speaker has documentation or reference materials for the committee, or if any member of the public would like to submit written comments, please email those comments to rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. During the public comment period, the committee will not offer comments in response. Directors or staff may contact speakers following their comments if they raise matters that lend themselves to follow-up. Speakers, please begin your remarks by stating your name, and each speaker will have 3 minutes to speak. Ms. McManus, do we have anybody in the queue or any written comments that were submitted?
No one in the queue and no written comments with 19 attendees.
Thank you very much, Ms. McManus. And seeing none with no participants in the queue, we're going to go ahead and close the public comment period at this time. We are going to move into section C of the evening. This is our information from external entities. We'll be looking at the sales and use tax forecast. So I'd like to ask Mr. Doug McLeod, our Chief Financial Officer, and the representatives from the University of Colorado Leeds School of Business to please present the sales and use tax forecast. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening. This is Doug McLeod, Chief Financial Officer. RTD is contracted with the Business Research Division of the Leeds School of Business at the University of Colorado to provide sales and use tax forecasts. Those forecasts are provided in March and September of each year to be used in the development of the midterm financial plan as well as the budgets. In the board package is both the full forecast report as well as tonight's presentation materials. This evening, I'd like to thank Rich Wilbekind and Brian Lewandowski for joining us from CU Leeds to present the sales and use tax forecast as well as an economic update. So Rich and Brian, please go ahead.
All right, well, thank you for inviting us. And as much as I think the economy is everything, I have to say after listening to the last section, I'm not sure I think the economy is everything. Thanks for all your work you're doing on everything else that's troubling the world. So this is our forecast team, myself and Brian, and you've met Robert McNown and Miles through the sessions. Robert's coming back from taking care of his brand new grandchild on the East Coast and is driving back. So he wishes us to acknowledge he's sorry he can't be here tonight to be part of this presentation, but very much appreciates the work with RTD. If we could move ahead, Brian, we can talk about the study. As we're indicating, this has been going on for a very long time for RTD. A comprehensive report with data analysis on the macroeconomy, state and district economies, demographic spending, and ultimately RTD sales and uses. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the macro sort of situation that we see going on right now and take it up to the initial part of the state. And then Brian's going to talk a little bit more about the sales tax environment and the actual forecast results that are in your report. So this is an interesting slide. It may not seem that way, but this is a slide, of course, that's getting tremendous amount of revision pretty much every month right now. So you have to choose a forecast that you're, forecast to run your projections on. But what we're seeing with the uncertainty driven by the Russia-Ukraine situation, and certainly by the inflation data that's being released, there are some revisions that continue to go on to the forecast of U.S. Quarterly GDP. In particular, this quarter and some of the quarters going forward in the future are now being revised down a little bit based on weaker belief on consumer spending and also on business investment. I'm happy to talk about that in more detail when we get a little further along. So the forecasts for this year are actually, it's okay, you can move on, but the forecasts for this year are actually being driven down to sort of the 3 to 3.2 to 3.6 range for this year in terms of annual growth. And when we went into this year, pretty much the consensus forecast for 2022 were over 4%. So this is a revision down, again, based on the factors I just mentioned. So one of the things we're seeing with employment is a significant recovery of employment. Through March, we're only down a little, 2 million jobs, roughly 1.6 million jobs. And we did wind up with something we've been talking about in these presentations before, somewhat of a checkmark recovery. So unlike GDP, which has already rebounded to its previous level in 2021, the employment number has not gotten back to the same level yet. It's still, even with the sort of slowing of the national growth this year, even with that, it's anticipated a continued 350,000 or 360,000 jobs a month. And we'll be getting back to sort of the same employment level by the summer of this year. Again, this is the national situation. You may have read in the paper or heard the actual report from the Department of Labor, but Colorado has already gained the same level of employment it had prior to the COVID recession. When we look at recessions in general, this has been rather remarkable. A huge amount of stimulus. It's amazing with how much stimulus can make a difference, but we could debate whether or not there's been sort of, too much stimulus with some of the issues we're facing right now. But all of that said, you can see how steep this decline was and how quickly we have rebounded from that decline. And at this point, we're only down 1% nationally from where we were going into this, going into the recession. And you can see in the previous recession, the global financial crisis recession, 2008, that we were just hitting the bottom at this point, minus 6.3%. So much more rapid recovery, and not the jobless recoveries we saw in the 2001 recession and the 2008 recession. Colorado is faring pretty well. The browner and tanner states are the ones that are doing better. And this is the year-over-year employment growth. You can see that many of the states in the Mountain West, Montana, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, Colorado, are doing better than the rest of the country. And even Wyoming and New Mexico are, sort of in the middle picture, if you will. So, this part of the country is doing extremely well. And if we were to map the states that have already gotten back to the same level of employment, you would see that there are 11 in the country. And those 11 in the country, as highlighted here from the pre-recession peak, are the darker brown and tan ones. And again, Idaho, Montana, Utah, Colorado, Arizona. So we just went over in this past month and we were number 11, but there's still, 40 other entities out there, including District of Columbia, that have not gotten back to pre-recession employment levels. So this has been, of course, the most intriguing thing. The Fed, as they realize that the inflation has moved a little bit more from transitory to permanent, they have had revisions in each of their major meetings. So you can see here what they were projecting in terms of interest rate increases in September of 2021, and then in December of 2021, and now in the March meeting, which just occurred a month ago, you can see the higher levels of interest rates being forecast. And of course, right now, there's a lot of discussion that that financial situation in May will include a 50 basis point increase on the short-term rates, but also a significant announcement in terms of quantitative tightening, selling off the balance sheet. In fact, what the expectation is, they will announce the selling off of the balance sheet at roughly twice the rate that they sold the balance sheet off between 2017 to 2019. So pretty dramatic situation. Again, being held with their feet to the fire a little bit by the inflation numbers that have been coming out. And this kind of shows the fact that the pundits, and we or I contribute to these surveys as well, have been pretty wrong in terms of forecasting when the peak will occur. I hate to even make the following statement, but we're pretty certain that this was the peak in March at this particular point. But you can see every time we've said that before, May, July, October, December, February, all of these have been wrong in terms of when the peak would occur. Right now, I think you can look at a lot of the numbers that are out there, and you can see some of the core goods in particular areas really dropping off in terms of their contribution to inflation. All of that said, you can also see to the right hand, if you didn't look at or pay much attention to today's release, the US was 8.5% for March. Denver, Aurora, Lakewood, 9.1%. So we're ahead of the national number. And I should just mention to you that the the Mountain West states, that's an area specific that includes some of those other states I mentioned, Idaho, Montana, Utah, and so on. For that whole area, or for this whole area, it's over 10% inflation for the month March, sort of year over year. So you're seeing these big numbers, but you also can see what's driving that. And food and beverage is driving that, but also in a really big way, transportation is driving that. So I made a comment that, we think this could be peaking. When you look at the core rate was substantially lower than the overall CPI, meaning that food and beverages and energy prices really were significant contributors in the past month. And we know, of course, gasoline was a big piece of that. So here's Colorado's rank among states. And, we went into this year debating whether or not Colorado would be a top 10 state this year. We didn't necessarily think it would be top 10. We were saying it would be somewhere between 10 and 15. So far, that seems to be sort of a reasonable statement, but still the state is doing quite well. The 1-year numbers, as you can see, on GDP, 12, on employment growth, 12. And then you see things like population growth, which we've slipped a little bit in, but still 12th in the country. And then importantly, personal income and per capita personal income, very, very strong growth. And in fact, overall as a state, we ranked number 8 in per capita personal income. And the vast majority of those states are on the 2 coasts that are higher. So you really, for an internal state, a ocean facing state, we have very, very strong per capita personal income. Look at the bottom and you can see that we're 20th in FHA home price index growth. Of course, that continues to remain a concern in terms of affordability and some of the issues we're facing. So here we're going to move on to national retail and food services sales. It's kind of a precursor to talking about retail sales in general. And I'm passing the baton to my colleague, Brian.
Right. Thank you, Rich, for that upfront macroeconomic discussion. So I'm going to start out by talking about national retail and food services sales. This chart here really presents this long stability in retail sales nationally. Of course, this is a seasonally adjusted number, so that the Census Bureau is smoothing out those figures. But what we'd like to point out here is the pandemic recession certainly shows up in the numbers. There's the deep decrease in national retail sales. And then if there's any sort of V-shaped recovery from the pandemic recession, it was in retail. You can see how retail sales rebounded. But really rebounded on a new trajectory. So we drew this red line on here to show this new trajectory. And the question is this really a new trajectory for retail sales? or is this a snapback from the recession, illustrating pent-up demand, illustrating increased personal income, illustrating the stimulus payments that came out from the federal government, illustrating inflation as of the last 5 or 6 months, or is this simply a shift out, which is showing you the green line? You know, we talk a lot about e-commerce and how that's changed how we consume as consumers, and perhaps lowered barriers to consuming because you can have so many goods delivered so easily to your doorstep. So this is really something that we're watching, but really phenomenal growth year over year and from the prior peak, up 25% nationally from the prior peak, up 18% year over year. So the consumer seems to continue to be out in the marketplace despite higher inflation, and perhaps because of higher inflation, a rush to purchase goods and services. So zooming into Colorado then, one metric that we have for this is taking a look at state tax collections. So this is taking a look at the state tax base, which is of course important to RTD because it's the same tax base. And like the nation, Colorado in 2020 overall for the full year did not record a decrease in taxable sales and sales taxes. In fact, recorded a slight increase in 2020. And that trajectory, like it did for the nation, changed in Colorado. And we've been on a much steeper trajectory of sales tax collections for all of the reasons that I just mentioned a moment ago. But as we look around Colorado, it's really fascinating to take a look at how jurisdictions have performed. Looking at different counties or different cities or municipalities across Colorado. And we've identified a handful of reasons why we think this has happened. One is certainly industry composition. You know, what are your key industries within your community? But the other important factors are how dependent are you on tourism? Those outsiders coming in and spending their money in your community. How dependent are you on in-commuters coming into your community by day, a place like Denver or a place like Boulder? They leave their dollars behind. They're eating out for lunch. They're doing a little bit of shopping during the day, and then they go back home. So that the daily commuter piece is certainly an important component. Retail mix during the early days of the pandemic, we noted that the big box stores outperformed Main Street retail, and they seem to continue to outperform Main Street retail. As well as development. So our community is still doing greenfield development, places like Aurora. And that also relates to population growth. So do you see more consumers within your community year after year? So that's a nice segue to the state sales tax collections, or taxable sales, I should say, by county. And what we pulled in here are counties within Colorado metropolitan statistical areas, and look at the diversity among these counties within Colorado. So Teller County, which is part of the Colorado Springs MSA, is up over 40% in 2021 compared to that last, pre-pandemic, last normal year of 2019. So they've recorded not only a recovery, but phenomenal growth over that last normal year. And then at the other extreme within these metropolitan counties, look at a place like Denver, which is up 2% over that last normal year of 2019. The red counties here are showing you mostly the regional transportation district, except for that little bit of Weld County that's in the district. But look at the extremes there, from Douglas County up about 30% to Denver up about 2%. The weighted average, I believe, is around 14% growth among that group of 7 counties. So we pay attention to that because that's an important tax base for us to be watching for RTD. And so now to your forecast. So to do your forecast, the way we've done this over the last 11 years or so is we are trying to relate key economic, demographic, and fiscal variables from the national economy to the Colorado economy to the RTD district economy. And this has proven to be fairly successful over this time period. One thing we started doing during the recession with the help of RTD staff, which was really critical, is bringing in some of the subcomponents of your sales tax collections. Because what we noted during the recession is different goods and services started performing wildly different during the recession as that consumer behavior changed. And that actually improved the forecast for RTD. So it's a practice that we continue. So for the short-term forecast, we rely on a lot of historical data from the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Labor Department. And we rely on a forecast from Moody's Analytics. And Moody's publishes a nice range of optimistic to pessimistic scenarios with a baseline forecast that they project out to be the most likely scenario going forward. And we review all of those forecasts, and we choose one that we think is the most likely scenario as we look forward. So what we did for this particular forecast, because of the rapid change in the economy with the Ukraine-Russia crisis, with rising inflation, we chose one step below the baseline forecast and chose a slightly more pessimistic forecast than the Moody's scenarios when we ran the forecast in March. And what I highlighted here on this slide is that the 2022 outlook from Moody's at that time was about 6% inflation under this S2 scenario. And GDP growth, even a little bit lower than what Rich was talking about a moment ago, about 2.3% growth, and a slightly rising unemployment rate by the end of the year. So you can see our little bit of caution when we were taking a look at the national economic situation. The negative growth for personal income on this slide is not reflecting an expectation per se of a recession, but rather the waning federal stimulus, where we came off this huge bump in fiscal support in 2020 and 2021, and now we're seeing that wane in 2022. So that's bringing overall personal income down, but the positive signal here is that we see personal income from employee earnings up in 2022. So with that as the foundation at the national level, I'm going to focus in on RTD's baseline forecast. And what we show here is that about 90% of RTD sales and use taxes comes from the sales tax side of the ledger. And growth last year in 2021 really was phenomenal, up about 20%. In 2022, we see that growth rate coming way down. We're projecting about 5.6% growth in 2022, and then 3.9% growth in 2023, bringing us up to about $830 million in 2023. So that's the very short-term forecast. Then we do a medium-term forecast that goes out to 2028. We're still using the Moody's scenarios out through 2028, and we try and provide a little bit of guidance as far as what we expect on the high side or the low side of that forecast. So there's two ways that we do this. One is by using an optimistic scenario and a more pessimistic scenario from Moody's Analytics for the US national drivers, and we relate that then to Colorado and to RTD. And then we also provide the upper and lower statistical bounds for our baseline forecast. And that's what we're really presenting here is under different economic conditions, you can see how RTD's revenue performs in the very short term. What's interesting is as we get out to the medium term, out to 2028, these forecasts somewhat converge where the optimistic scenario is up about 2.3% over the baseline and the pessimistic scenarios down a little over 1% from that baseline forecast. But our upper and lower bounds show that level of uncertainty as we look out to the medium term. Notice though, on the left axis, as we get out to 2028, RTD revenue is over $1 billion, okay? These are nominal dollars. These are not inflation adjusted. So as we go through this period right now of higher inflation, that drives up the base revenues for RTD, which then carry forward to future years. The last exercise that we do is a long-term forecast. This is a forecast that goes out through 2050. And we transition from Moody's scenarios to our own forecast for GDP and demographics and retail sales. And here again, we provide this upper and lower bound. For this long-term forecast, what I'm presenting here is in nominal dollars or current dollars. These are not inflation adjusted, but we also have an inflation adjusted series within the full report. And what we show is that over the 3 decades, you can see in the table that from 2021 to 2030, the taxable sales and taxes grow about 5.3%, then 2.8%, then 1.8%. So it's a slowing trajectory, which is really illustrating the changing demographics within the Colorado economy as we grow more slowly as a state, as well as we age in place as a state. So my closing comments here are just to mention a few additional notes. One is we are constantly checking our errors. And I'm proud to say that over the 11 years that we've been doing this, our short-term forecast error has been less than 1%. It's about 0.9%. And that's even through periods of volatility, just averaging out that short-term forecast over 11 years. We have tended to be on the low side of the forecast more often than we've been on the high side. So I believe it's about 71 times that we've been high for the RTD forecast and 90 times or so that we've been below the actuals when they come in. So we tend to be, I'd say, a little bit conservative in our model forecasts, but it's fairly split between high and low. So there's not an overall tendency for us to be too high or too low. And I wanted to also note that we don't add any add factors where we're not just changing the final numbers based on our gut feelings about the economy. These are truly model driven estimates. And so with that, that is the end of our presentation. And Rich and I are happy to take some questions from you if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you gentlemen. I very much appreciate it. Very thorough, and particularly really appreciate the call out on the accuracy of the numbers and where you've trended. That's really appreciate that data point. I'll now call on directors for some discussion here. I'll start with Director Deschel.
Thanks so much, Director Davidson, and thank you to the whole team who prepared this report and the supplemental materials, which I guess actually the report. But anyways, I read those and I find them to be helpful and interesting. Question for you all, and I feel like I've asked this maybe different groups before, but when I'm looking at the use taxes for this year, we're showing that Colorado use taxes are at 30.71% up, but RTD's use taxes are only 7.75%. Are there portions of the use tax that we're missing where we should be lobbying at the state level? Or is this more a demonstration of growth in areas that are not RTD's district?
Thank you for the question, Director
Brian, to
Deschel.
answer that question, I think the answer is both, but Brian, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think I'd have to actually dig into it to be able to provide you a better answer. I will note that use taxes is extremely volatile. It's much more volatile than sales taxes. And even before the pandemic recession, it could swing 20% any given year. So what I'd like to do is just dig into that and compare use taxes within the district and compare it to all of the other counties except for the district to see if we some sort of systemic difference between the two.
That'd be great, yeah, because I think especially as on this group, we talk about different ways to capture revenue, and that would be if we're missing something, make sure we're getting it. My other question is more for Mr. McLeod, I think, which is, as I understand it, we modeled our midterm forecast based on a CPI of about 6, and in September of 21. And this year, I don't think we've hit 6 once. I think January was 6.5, March was 7.5, or March was 9, So how do we square, with the CPI being off by potentially a factor of about 50%? How do we, what do you do when you see that change? What am I looking at, knowing that I'm seeing that we projected at 1, to no fault of anyone on this call, the numbers are just different in today's world. How do you adjust our midterm forecast to account for that?
Thank you for the question. And we actually have a model. It's called Enterprise Planning and Budgeting System within Oracle. And that actually allows us to adjust the inflation factors that we use. And we can set up those inflation factors for different categories. So for wages, consumables, et cetera. So we do adjust those. And obviously back in October, when the latest MTFP was approved, we didn't have the benefit of the information that's come forth since that time regarding inflation being substantially higher. So we will adjust with the next midterm financial plan. And those adjustments primarily affect our expenditure side of the house. It's worth noting that we do like budget certainty. And so for things, General Manager and CEO Johnson actually had us contract for fuel prices. So as an example, we contracted for fuel prices, diesel fuel prices in 2022, thereby locking down the price. So we do have some budget certainty and realize some significant savings on that front. However, regarding our forecasting going forward, we will adjust for those inflationary pressures.
Yeah, no kidding on fuel price savings. And my last question, I guess, is probably for the economist, which is, as I look at these numbers, and it's back to comparing inflation, the percent change, the CPI change, and sales tax changes. So it's awesome that sales tax revenues are up, but are they up enough such that I'm actually making money, as opposed to my net position effectively being down?
Are you asking as an individual business or you're asking as RTD?
As an agency.
Your real sales are up because you can take the 6% or 9% off or whatever, and you're way above that. And the state is way above that. So if you adjusted for real terms, your revenues would be higher. So you're okay. I mean, I think just from an economist or business economist standpoint, the bigger issue is, can the individual business pass their increases on in terms of meal prices or whatever, especially small businesses in the environment they're operating in. And I think that's the more difficult piece. I realize that's not your problem, but that's the more difficult piece right now. But you're definitely up. And again, as Brian highlighted, and it's really important to just remember, that's built into the forecast going forward. So as you're, the base is getting higher as you go over time because some of it's being inflation based. And just as a sidebar, Doug mentioned, or Mr. McLeod mentioned that they've already locked in fuel contracts. I don't think 6% is crazy for this year yet. Fuel was a huge percentage of the monthly increase. And I really do think you're going to start to see some tailing off in the second part of the year in terms of year-over-year increases. So I don't think 6%. Right now, it looks like it's 50% off because it's 9% this month. But I really do think you're going to be seeing months ahead that are going to be like 7% year over year or whatever, much closer to the 6% number.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Director Deschel, and thank you for the answers there. Helpful. Director Broom.
Thank you, Chair. I think the problem with use tax is probably on the automobile side. The dealers don't have any cars because of the backup in the supply chain, so they can't sell them, and that's causing the use tax on cars to probably go down. The other thing I think you'll note is that in the early months of high inflation, the economy does well because people have lots of money and they're trying to spend in order to beat inflation. But then it comes back to haunt you in the latter part of that cycle, and it's going to hurt the economy going forward. Thanks.
Can I comment on that? You just made a comment that not everybody knows. I'm sorry to say this, but yes, when you have inflation expectations, it drives consumption in the short run. Absolutely. So I 100% agree with you. And then you get the effects, secondary effects later on. And that's what I was talking about in terms of slower GDP growth later in the year, because then you expect the consumption to sort of slow down. So yes, thank you for those comments.
Yes, thank you, Director Broom. Excellent points. Director Cook.
Yeah, quick. Director Deschelle's questions about comments caused me to scroll back through the backup I had. Did you all update the slides? I didn't find the slide that had the inflation laid out with the weights according to housing and transportation, et cetera. So if you have updated those, can we get those as well? They weren't in the packet that I scrolled through just now, just in case. And then secondly, you know, we're facing the possibility that the base 0.6 cents will no longer be debruced after 2024. And that says to us that we need to pay really sharp attention to inflation as one factor in determining whether we can keep the revenues. Do you all have any recommendations for how we begin to do our modeling? Does that change anything in terms of how we look at things going forward for the midterm financial plan range?
Thank you for the question, Director Cook. Mr. McLeod, would you like to kick that off, given that that is midterm financial plan impact?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And certainly that's a challenge that we do have. I'd like to get with Brian and Rich and his team and discuss how we can strategize modeling that. Obviously, that's a difficult exercise and relies on significant assumptions. I would add that in the last midterm financial plan that was approved by the board in October, which is the periods of 2022 through 2027, what we did is we limited the growth, sales tax growth in the base system, the 0.6, between 2025 and 2027 to just 1%. So we actually came down off of what CU Leads had provided us for a forecast, just to give a little bit more of a conservative look. But yeah, I'd like to strategize a little bit more with the team from CU and see what options we might have available to us.
Great, I'm glad you're doing that. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McLeod. Thanks, Director Cook. It's a great point. I know that we've just been kind of backing off a little bit, and perhaps there's a better way to model that. So thank you for the discussion. Director Broom, your hand is still raised. Did you have another question or comment?
No, I'm just slow.
No problem. Thank you, sir. All righty. Any other questions or comments from directors? All right. Well, seeing that, well, thank you very much, gentlemen. This is very helpful and really appreciate the reports. And again, getting the numbers on kind of how we're doing against plan. I recognize that we're going into a little bit of uncertainty with regards to inflation. And I think we all need to temper, you know, it's great to see some of these increases in sales tax a little higher than we thought, but you know, we'll take a look at where we are in a couple of months, and thank you for giving us some data to act on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. We are going to move on from the information from external entities section of our agenda, and we will move into recommended actions. We do have one recommended action on the agenda this evening, and that recommended action is a budget transfer for coping panels. This is for the Board of Directors to approve a budget transfer of $6 million from the unrestricted fund balance to light rail maintenance of way for coping panel repairs, and to authorize the general manager and CEO or her designee to enter into a contract to complete these repairs. So first, I will entertain a motion. Do I have a motion?
So
moved.
I heard Director Whitmore as the mover, and I believe Director Geisinger as a second.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. And so with that, I would ask Mr. Doug McLeod, Chief Financial Officer, and Dave Jensen, Assistant General Manager of Rail Operations, to present any pertinent information that's been prepared for the board regarding this action.
Thank you, Chair Davidson. So this action item is brought to the Finance Committee because it's a request to transfer funds. However, it primarily affects rail operations. So General Manager of Rail Operations, Dave Jensen is joining me tonight to give a quick description of the project. And I'll be sharing some pictures during his discussion just to provide references to what a coping panel actually is. Dave, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening. I am Dave Jensen, the Assistant General Manager of Rail Operations. And if Mr. McLeod, you can pull the pictures up now would be the time. My intention is to keep comments very brief. There's not much to add other than what was provided in the board packet. So the project itself really is to reinforce coping panels, which are decorative panels attached to retaining walls. As you see, I believe and hope in front of you. So these coping panels are attached along the retaining wall adjacent to the right of way. Primarily, we're speaking about the I-25 corridor, the southeast corridor on the rail line. And essentially what we're discussing and why we're here this evening is to outsource this work because our light rail maintenance of way team right now is struggling with our people power problem. And we are able to keep up with the day-to-day work, and we are working on our state of good repair, but to take on a project of this magnitude and accomplish it in a timely manner it is a challenge that would be very difficult for us. And so that essentially concludes my comments. I'm willing to take questions. I know that there's other staff members, and Mr. Stoppelkamp, Assistant General Manager of Capital Programs, is available as well to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jensen, Mr. McLeod, much appreciated. Any questions or comments from my colleagues on the board? All right. Seeing none, thank you very much for the presentation, for the comments, and for bringing the recommended action forward and for moving forward with this contracting. I'm going to go ahead and call for a vote. We'll do this by asking, are there any no votes on this action? Wonderful. Seeing none, with 7 aye votes and 0 no votes and 0 abstentions, this motion passes. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for the presentation. We're going to go ahead and move into the discussion items portion of our agenda. We do have 2 discussion items this evening. We're going to go ahead and start with the first, which is the Colorado 119 BRT, or Bus Rapid Transit implementation. I'll go ahead and ask Mr. Ali, our project manager and engineering lead of capital programs, and Mr. Chris for our planning project manager and planning, to present this discussion item.
Mr. Chair, if I may, prior to having our teammates present this, I'd like to call upon Mr. Stoppelkamp to introduce the item, if you would allow that. Thank you. Mr.
Sure,
Stoppelkamp?
please. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson and Chair. Real quick, I know there's the board packet has included the PowerPoint that you're about to see. So like you said, Ali and Chris will go through it and open it up for comments. This is for information for the board. A little bit of background on the BRT project in 119, where we're at and where we're going. So with that, let's go ahead. Ali, why don't you go ahead and introduce you and Chris and take it away.
So my name is Ali Mansafahi, with Capital Programs, Engineering Project Manager. With me co-presenting is Chris Quinn, the Planning Project Manager. So if I can share my screen real quick. All right, we're here to bring you up to speed on Colorado 119 implementation of Bus Rapid Transit. We're going to give you a background and the history of the project and the BRT elements we wish to implement as part of this project. I'm going to go through the funding status and the next steps. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris.
Good evening. This is Chris Quinn, the RTD Planning Project Manager for the study. Just a real quick little bit of background. Back in 2013, RTD, recognizing the fact that we were not going to be able to implement the Northwest Rail Corridor within the short term, we conducted the Northwest Area Mobility Study, also known as NAMS. And the purpose of that was to try to determine if there were any short-term cost-effective mobility improvements we could make in the Northwest region in a much faster time frame. Working with the local jurisdictions, DRCOG and CDOT, we developed what was called a final consensus statement. And that was, it identified the priorities for transportation improvements in the Northwest area. And one of the top priorities was establishing bus rapid transit, or BRT, in the Colorado 119 corridor between and within Boulder and Longmont. And the board did approve the consensus statement in June of 2014. We then followed up with what is called a Planning and Environmental Linkages Study, or also known as a PEL. And the purpose of the PEL was to take a deeper dive, kind of come up with some refinements on both our cost estimates, potential environmental impacts, as well as design for BRT in the corridor. We completed that effort in 2019. And again, we were working very closely with CDOT, DRCOG, and the local governments in the corridor. The PEL established a vision plan, and that included BRT, or managed lanes, in the highway portion of the corridor. And by managed lanes, we mean something similar to what's out on US 36, whereby the lanes would be open to high occupancy vehicles, buses, and tolled vehicles willing to pay tolls. The PEL vision also included a busway in Longmont on Kaufman Street, which parallels Main Street. It also included transit improvements on 28th Street in Boulder, as well as improved transit stops in both Boulder and Longmont, and then a bikeway along the entirety of the corridor. I'm going to hand it back to Ellie to walk through some of those improvements in a little bit more detail.
So the map on the right identifies the project as a whole, and it's actually two projects. The first project is what is known as the Safety and Mobility Project that CDOT is running, and we are heavily collaborating with them. The limits of that project is in between the brown boxes. This is the southern limit of the project at Foothills Parkway, and the northern limit of the project at Hoover Street, just south of Longmont. This corridor, otherwise known as the Diagonal, and the BRT implementation that we're having, though, goes beyond the scope of CDOT's project. And by that, I mean where the orange or the red boxes are showing the limits of the project as far as RTD is concerned. So between the cities of Boulder and Longmont, and you'll see all the improvements, and we're gonna discuss that further. Parking rides along the way in Diagonal, new platforms along at Colorado 52, brand new parking ride on the northern terminus of the project, and improvements at CU campus. And all the red dots that you see are going to be BRT grade stops in Longmont and in Boulder. The design of this project is well underway. As I said, CDOT is implementing the trunk segment, and we're collaborating with them and heavily working with them. We've been at it for the last year and a half, and one significant finding of the design process was the outcome of the traffic alternative analysis study, which in fact deemed managed lanes that were previously selected alternative during the PEL process as infeasible. And we're gonna talk about what the preferred alternative is. Chris?
Yeah, so just real quickly, in kind of interjecting in here, the overall, the study at this point, the design study is governed by an executive oversight committee, what we refer to as an EOC, and it includes all of the positions that you see listed on the bullets, including our own general manager, Deborah Johnson. And the EOC did approve going and recognizing that the managed lanes were not going to work in the corridor, at least in the short term. They did approve instead going with Q bypass lanes as the preferred alternative, and that was at the end of 2021.
And with that, what are the Q bypass lanes? Q bypass lanes are typically installed on the right side of the highway or the roadway, but because of the geometry of Colorado 119 and a very wide median that is present in 119, the design team decided to move the Q bypass lanes to the left side of the freeway. This would be a future parking ride, and these are going to be the BRT stops. So the bus moves from the general purpose lane into its own lane, proceeds through the intersection, gets what is called as a Q jump signal, which lets the bus move ahead of the general purpose traffic, so it gives them a head start. Crosses the intersection, gets to the other side where the platform and the bus station, BRT station is. Alighting and boarding happen, and then the bus proceeds into the general purpose lane and moves forward. This design, and based on our past experience, the transit bypass or the Q bypass lanes account for a significant reduction of travel time for the buses and therefore for our customers. Agency responsibilities are, as you see in this slide, we at RTD are in charge of designing and helping CDOT construct the parking rides along the diagonal. A parking ride that I mentioned previously at the junction of Main and Colorado 66, the northern terminus in Longmont, significant improvements to the CU East campus, a whole host of stations and BRT stops in both cities of Longmont and Boulder, and implementation of transit signal priority, which I just spoke of in the last slide. And that's a responsibility we share with CDOT because we're going to be implementing that using their traffic signal system. Because this is mainly a CDOT roadway, the roadway improvements are going to be spearheaded by CDOT, including construction of the Q bypass lanes, all the intersection improvements, traffic signal improvements, and intelligent transportation system improvements, which basically is the usage of technology to make the overall operation significantly better. Boulder County, on the other hand, is the agency that is spearheading the implementation of the bikeway along the corridor. Chris?
So just to go over real quickly, the funding that is available, at least on the RTD end, the midterm financial plan includes $5 million this year, and then the plan allocates $28 million for the future years. And just to be clear, RTD's focus, or the funds that RTD would be spending, would be focused only on the transit elements, specifically the stations and park and rides, as well as the enhanced bus stops in both Boulder and Longmont. But we are working with CDOT in collaboration to try to determine where we can find funding for the Q bypass lanes. And then we have been in partnership working very closely with the local stakeholders in CDOT for a variety of grants that are out there. As you're probably aware, with most federal grants, as part of the application, you are required to provide generally about at least a 20% local match. So we have been working with our partners to share local matches for specific grants. One that has been awarded through the DRCOG TIP is for the redesign and for the Q jumps of the Colorado 52 119 intersection. And we have also just applied for, Boulder County has applied for, and we are sharing the local match on a DRCOG TIP grant for additional Q bypass lanes as well as upgrades and to the bikeway along the corridor. And then lastly, we're working collectively with pretty much all of the stakeholders in the corridor on a federal RAISE grant. And that would be pretty much to complete all of the remaining elements in the corridor, all of the transit, roadway, and bikeway elements. So assuming we were to receive acceptance on all of those grants, we would have the funds to construct nearly all of the elements of the corridor. One of the things I do want to emphasize here, though, it's been assumed that RTD's contribution to the corridor will be capped at 33 million, the 33 million that has been identified in the midterm financial plan. But one of the benefits of pursuing these grants is obviously we are able to leverage the funds that we do have, the 33 million, and it has demonstrated, of course, that we're willing to work with our local partners to get as many improvements in the corridor as we can. If we don't receive all of these grants, especially the RAISE grant, there will be some outstanding items that we'll have to find funding for, but we're confident that we may do fairly well on these. And now
so the benefits of grant funds are, as you see, shown in these two matrices. The beauty of this project, I call it the beauty of this project, is no matter what happens with those grants, whether we get one or both of them or none of them, our commitments remain the same. By our commitments, I mean the BRT platforms and the parking rides at 63rd, at Niwot, and BRT platforms only, no parking ride at Colorado 52, which amounts to $11.1 million. We have already, in the last couple of years, or I believe it was 2020, secured another TIP grant that helps us fund the construction of the Q bypass lanes at Colorado 52 intersection for another $5 million, for a total of $16 million. The previous slide, we mentioned the $33 million cap. So there is your $16 million, which means that leaves us with $17 million to implement all the remaining stops and the parking ride, and the stops in Boulder and Longmont, along with the parking ride in Longmont and the CU East Campus improvements that I mentioned. Next steps are, well, later this week, our partners, I believe it's Boulder County, who is going to be submitting the RAISE grant on behalf of all the stakeholders, including us. We're going to be coming back to you next month to ask you to delegate authority to GM CEO Johnson to enter into agreements with CDOT and other stakeholders. And in the meantime, Chris, myself, whole host of other designers are working with CDOT and other stakeholders and helping us move the project forward. With that, I will open it to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Shalman. Appreciate that. Thank you for touching on the status of the funding with and without the grants. Really appreciate it and appreciate the update. I'll go ahead and call on directors for questions, comments, discussion. We'll start with Director Broom, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can the project be easily phased in the event you don't get all of the funding up front? I mean, you know, if you build a bridge across the Mississippi River and you've only got enough to go 80% of the way, it doesn't do you much good because you can't use it at all.
Who would like to take that that question in terms of phasing?
Ollie, why don't you go ahead and take that question?
Sure. Yes, the project from the very get-go designed in a modular format, and the last slide that I showed regarding the commitments remaining the same as far as RTD is concerned, we will build what we can with the money that we have, and more than likely those grants we may not get both grants, and that would be just to what you said, to what Director Broom, We will build it in bits and pieces. CDOT also is in the same boat. There is more than likely that we don't have enough money to build the whole thing, but it is very modular and it could be designed and built in segments.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Director Deschel.
Yeah, thank you. Who is responsible for cost overruns on this project?
CDOT is. That is for the diagonal portion. That's the CDOT Safety and Mobility Project. And then that project within the project that I showed. And then when we are going to be building the stops in Boulder and Longmont, we will be in charge of the project, including the overruns, if any. We make sure we don't have them, but.
I know projects ever have cost overruns, I know. The next sort of question or comment is, it gives me a lot of pause because on the one hand, when we've asked about bus stops in the past from an equity lens, when we have poles in frozen slanted ground or overgrown vegetation, a lot of roadblocks are put up. Cost roadblocks, right-of-way roadblocks, ownership roadblocks. And here, we're putting up $1.5 million per bus stop, no problem. And so is it safe to expect that we should see similar substantial improvements on higher use corridors like we've seen on Colfax or in other spaces? Or is this really more of a one-off? Certain communities are going to get state-of-the-art, really nice bus stops, and others are going to have holes in the ground.
Mr. Chair, if I could take.
Ms. Johnson, if please. Thank you, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very kindly. So thank you, Director Deschel, for the question. And I would be remiss to state that I think we're comparing apples and fish in reference to how you frame this collectively. We have collaborated as this has been identified as a potential corridor for bus rapid transit. As we work in earnest with our partners along the Colfax corridor in the city and county of Denver and working with the city of Aurora, there has been basic elements that have been prescribed relative to that project as well. Quite naturally, as we go through the process, we are looking at a lens of equity as we look at the project holistically. So looking at one project in one geographic area where we're looking at a different funding source relative to a raised grant versus the funding source we're using for Colfax, there's different eligibility requirements going back to previous discussions we had in the preceding special board meeting. So I just wanted to qualify that because we're looking at a project holistically, and to be funded from a federal vantage point, we have to ensure that we are being equitable as we look at Title VI and things of the like. So I wanted to frame that in reference to your question. As we look holistically at the district, as you may be aware, our transit service equity work group is working in tandem holistically as we look at the district, trying to level the playing field, because a lot of these elements are contingent upon working cohesively with partners as we don't own the right of way. And so as we do this with some of the elements that have been in existence prior to the American with Disabilities Act, we have to identify funding, and we are working in earnest to do that holistically. So I let me know if I didn't answer your question. Thank you.
Yeah, it's helpful. It's that it's, for me, it's evaluating which communities and grants got prioritized and which aren't. And it's not I mean, there's 20, 30, 40 years of people before this current group who made those choices and have those stops in the way that they are. I guess so what I'm hearing is that it's, in short, it's no, we shouldn't expect to see this as the standard bus stop for more used routes, because if we're talking about BRT, I mean, is a Q jump BRT? Is that what we're defining as BRT?
here in this region, this would be more or less classified as bus rapid transit light. I believe, just for everybody's edification, when we talk about bus rapid transit in the true form as prescribed from the Federal Transit Administration, typically we are looking at fixed guideways and things of the like. I made that mistake when I first entered this geographic region because oftentimes we refer to BRT with over-the-road coach. So qualifying the parameters of the project as prescribed, it would be analogous to what has been discussed previously, looking at what we qualify as the BRT corridor using the Flatiron Flyer as an example. So in an effort to manage all the expectations, I would qualify this as BRT light.
Got it. And just for my, does BRT drive the type of the $1.5 million bus stops? Is that what drives the nicer bus stop? Is that it's BRT?
I believe there's some elements when you look at BRT across the board. I'll give an example. Just recently in the city and county of San Francisco, there's True BRT that just opened that had been in the works for about 15 years. So as relates to bus stops per se, it's contingent upon what the design of the program is and the project in and of itself and what's been decided upon as it relates to having customer amenities. And I see Topocam, did you want to add anything to that discussion, sir?
Yes, and I think Mr. Soroy's got this probably the same thing, but the bus stops, the $1.5 million, I think, is a little bit high for a bus stop. We've got platforms, intersections, park and rides, so we're doing the improvement on the park and rides. So it's not just a bus stop. And then as far as running through Longmont and Boulder, most of those are replacing existing canopies and odds and ends. They will not be super high dollar shelters. One of the reasons why we've got plenty of them out there as stops, and we don't have that much money to go into it. So earlier on, somebody had asked whether or not there will be overruns. We are designing a building to budget. And so the project team knows they've got the $33 million. And if we have to cut back on a shelter or two, and if our partners do not step up, we will be one or two shelters short, but we are building to that $33 million, and we're designing our shelters and stops to meet that budget.
Mr. Soroy, would you like to add? And I apologize, I didn't see your hand.
Yeah, that's okay. Again, this is Bill Soroy, Senior Manager of Transit Communities. I just wanted to add just the bigger picture on BRT. You know, we did a regional BRT feasibility study a few years ago. The several jurisdictions are proactive on that, Boulder County being one of them. You know, Denver is moving forward with Colfax, but they're also moving forward with federal. So we're working with them about grant opportunities for that. You know, there's State Highway 7 up north. So there are a variety of different projects that are moving forward. 119 and Colfax, I say, are the two furthest along. So you will be seeing more projects moving forward in the future. So you can bet that you'll see more projects coming, being updated as we look at partnering with others for grants.
Great.
Thank you. And I also see the hand up of Mr. Ali.
Sure. I just wanted to bring to your attention that the reason that those bus stops, you know, the $1.5 million BRT platform cost at 63rd and Niwot is because unlike what we did at, for example, at 15L at Colfax, which was my other project, this is, there is nothing in the middle of 119. So we have to build it literally from ground up. All the drainage work, all the structural, all the geotechnical work, you're starting from scratch. There is nothing to build out there. That is the main reason that the cost is, the capital cost, initial capital cost seems to be significantly higher.
Great. Thank you all so much for the comprehensive response. All for raising the floor on our bus stops.
Thank you.
Making everyone's lives better through connections.
Thank you, Director Deschel. Director Catlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ali, I'm curious, have you done a modeling to determine what time savings could be realized if all of the Q bypass installations were completed? Is there an estimate of what that travel time savings would be for transit?
Yes, through the intersections by as much as 50% faster than what we have out there today, which is basically the Bolt route. On top of that, our findings from the Colfax project, the 15L project, shows 2 minutes per intersection. And now, mind you, that's in the middle of an urban area, which is very different than out here. So the numbers look really good. But Peggy, to your point, Director Catlin.
Yeah, it's okay.
I've known Director Catlin for a long, long time. So anyway, we have an effort underway to do exactly what you said. So we're going to be tracking these numbers based on our findings from the other BRT implementations, being US 36 and what is happening on Colfax, which wasn't a BRT implementation, but we have transit signal priority and some queue jump lanes to use and see how we can feed the model for 119 and really determine those savings, time savings.
If I might, I just think that this is a really big selling point to increase ridership, to really promote what that travel time savings would be. And
yes,
that was why I was asking the question. Thank you. And Allie, you can still call me Peggy after 35 years.
We go way, way back. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Director Geisinger.
Thank you very much. First of all, I think I really appreciate all the work that all the team has done on this project. I think it's come down a lot in scope, the overall project. I think it seems very appropriate, and I think the RTD staff has really done a great job of moving it forward. I would just add a couple of things. I think CDOT and all of us are pretty optimistic. CDOT in particular seems very optimistic about the RAISE grant, which would basically bring in the RAISE and the TIP grants would bring in the rest of the money needed. And the reason is that the safety concerns on this route are eye-popping. And I don't have the statistics in front of me. I don't know if either of you do. They were some that CDOT provided at a meeting last week, but the number of crashes, the number of injuries and deaths were very concerning, and they're very optimistic that will be persuasive in terms of the grant applications. And the other thing is this highway is getting really busy, really jammed, and so I'm very excited. I appreciated the numbers that Director Catlin just raised and that you had there, that the 50% savings. My hope is that we'll get more people on the bus. RTD, was one of the first to commit with this 33 million. And as Ali says, the beauty is that's the commitment. It's not going up. CDOT, Boulder County, others are moving forward, but it's been a collaborative effort on all of these grants, and I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. I'll see no other hands. I'll just echo some of the sentiments here of just thank you for the presentation, for walking us through this again, especially the clarity around, what happens if we don't get some of these grants. I know we're all very optimistic about it, but I know I've had the benefit of learning from you all that the RAISE grants are fairly competitive, and the requirements have shifted and changed, and there have been some prior passes at this. So recognizing that, a variety of things could happen, it's encouraging that we have the funds allocated, we have a clear path forward, and certainly from what I understand and I've learned from you all, the queue jumps and it sounds like a great path forward. So thank you for the update and for collaborating with all of our regional partners and delivering strong community value. Thanks.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, seeing no other comments or questions on that discussion item, we will move to our second discussion item of the evening, which is the General Election Day System-Wide Fare-Free Transit. For this, we'll hand the floor to General Manager and CEO Deborah Johnson to present information on this. And just as a reminder, this had come in as an inquiry, and I see Director Bouquet has joined us this evening. So thank you very much for being here regarding what might be possible and what the impacts might be regarding a free fare on general election day. So with that, Ms. Johnson, if you wouldn't mind taking the floor.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And just by way of orientation and a gentle reminder, at last month's board meeting on Tuesday, March 22nd, during other matters, as you indicated, Director Bouquet did raise the question of RTD's ability to provide fare free transit days for general elections. And recognizing, I said that I'd be committed to coming back to the board to provide some information pertaining to that. And so just real quickly, as this is already included in your board packet, wanted to just share the data that we were able to leverage demonstrated that approximately 30% of non-voters claim that the lack of transportation to the polls is a critical factor in them deciding not to exercise their constitutional rights. And among persons of color under the age of 30 that responded to the survey that facilitated the data that we used, 38% of that population cited a lack of transportation as a reason for not voting. So additionally, Colorado's all-mail ballot voting significantly increases voter turnout, but providing fare-free transit during general elections would further reduce barriers to polling places, particularly among traditionally disadvantaged voter groups, recognizing that we as an agency through our strategic plan are committed to community value, looking at the cost from a financial impact status and recognizing the earlier meeting that we had, total cost for this expenditure to provide that fare-free transit on general elections, which would basically be a biennial occurrence, would roughly be $360,000. So with that, I will yield the floor back to you, Mr. Chairman, should there be additional questions and comments relative to this subject before you.
Thank you, General Manager and CEO Johnson, for bringing us some data points there, and thank you, Director Director Bouquet, for bringing this concept to the board. I see that you have your hand raised, and thank you for joining us. I'll go ahead and hand the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think I more would want to just kind of start off with a thank you to Ms. Johnson for putting in the effort and her team into looking and researching this. Mine is more just general comments. So San Diego Metro Transit System, Dallas Area Rapid Transit, Utah Transit Authority, Charlotte Area Transit, Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, New Orleans Regional Transit Authority, Sacramento Regional Transit, Topeka Metro, and Wichita Transit are just a couple transit agencies that offered fare-free rides on November 3rd of 2020, which was the last general election cycle. I believe it's 20% of the top 50 transit organizations in the country offered fare-free transit in November 3rd of 2020. For me, this is kind of a no-brainer. As the CEO and GM has mentioned, it is just getting rid of any barriers, for folks. And as mentioned, to that survey where 30% are saying that was a major barrier for them ultimately not deciding not to vote. That was eye-opening, and I think we all are aware of that. And if we are as a board ultimately able to pass this into a resolution to offer fare-free transit on general election days, I think it's going to create a new world of voting accessibility here in Colorado. I know we are pretty accessible as it is, but I think it's also going to be creating new possibilities for our community to try a ride. And, that's a huge thing I keep hearing of, how can we get our community to actually hop on? And I think this would be an excellent way to go forward. And I'll just end my comments because it's going to a late night. I do encourage my fellow board members on the financial committee to consider taking the next steps into making this discussion item into an action item and ultimately a policy of RTD. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Bouquet, for the comments. Certainly more than a couple that you cited. I appreciate the reference on that. And I would just ask, I know there have been some emails and concepts about some of the other fare-free days that may or may not exist. I just wanted to make sure we could have our discussion and questions aimed around the general election pre-fair here, so we can give some direction to staff as to whether we would like to proceed with a recommended action and move to next steps, for which Ms. Johnson, I'll look to your guidance as to how you'd like to proceed and what type of feedback you'd like. So with that, I'll go ahead and continue the discussion here, and Director Deschel.
Thanks, and thanks to Director Bouquet and also Director Lewis for raising this back in 2020. I think it's an amazing starting point, and I would love to see us start here and move to expand it to the week leading up to it. My question is, the week leading up to elections, recognizing that in Colorado, not only do we have mail-in ballots, we have early voting, and our polls are open relatively long periods of time. I guess my question is, do our buses go to the polls? And if they don't, how does that impact, if we wanted to run a special board to make sure you got to the polls? Or I don't know if special board was the right term, but my concern is I want to make sure that A, yes, we do this, but B, that our buses actually go in a reasonable distance of the polling places where we're giving people free access to.
Thank you, Director Deschel. Ms. Johnson, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Director Deschel. And also Director Bouquet, thank you for naming those transit agencies. And I'd be remiss to say you didn't name my former transit agencies, which were some of the first, which is in Los Angeles County, with LA Metro and Long Beach Transit basically being in the forefront of all of this. But to your point, Director Deschel, the intent here is to provide transit service on the day of election. I know in some areas that basically polls are open early. And so that would be something that would constitute a larger financial commitment going forward. As you talked about, potentially designating routes to get to various polling places. Collectively, from my experience, and we haven't delved into this, polling places are generally at public places. And there are some polling places, I don't know if this is here in Colorado, I'm speaking from previous experience, where there could be some where people use their residences as polling places and things of the like. So quite naturally, the intent here is to decrease the barriers. We wouldn't absolve the issue of all barriers to polling. And I believe, to your point, it would be a great starting point, recognizing the transit agencies that Director Bouquet referenced. It's very in line with other transit agencies across the country in the commitment as we could showcase our community value. So I wanted to offer those comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Deschel, any further questions on that? Great, I see the thumbs up. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Great point. And again, another opportunity to watch some of the data, looking at how this progresses as a starting point if we were to move in this direction. Director Cook.
I didn't realize I was next. So, the thing that gives me pause is we've got in Colorado so many options for voting, and the vast majority of it gets done before Election Day, and that's what we want. Do we know, how many have not voted by the time you get down to Election Day? Is it 5% of the total ballots that get returned? And so are we matching the benefit of a single day to the need? And is there a way through, I don't know, if somebody can show their ballot, they can ride any day in the election return period or something like that? And then the second thought is, can we talk to the Secretary of State, get her thoughts and maybe some data about this sort of thing? How many people vote by mail? How many people drop off at the drop boxes? I think there are hundreds in each county. And what her thoughts are about how we, the agency, can facilitate returns. Is it best done by a single day? Is it best done by enabling people to present something so that they can ride during the entire period? I just want to, be more effective, I guess, in considering this.
Thank you, Director Cook. Ms. Johnson, is there anything you'd like to comment on? I heard in there just good questions in terms of, if I heard correctly, what data we may or may not have regarding who hasn't voted and what the day of is, as well as, would we run this by the Secretary of State to look for perhaps effective means? Ms. Johnson, is that anything that you'd like to comment on?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We could reach out and do that. The intent here was to bring forward information relative to the financial obligations, and hence that's why we're coming to this committee. I appreciate the comments of Director Cook. Just for everybody's edification, we have been working with for some time as we wanted to ensure that there were drop-off boxes on some RTD property, and had reached out on a different occasion with the Secretary of State on that element. So we do have contacts established as we look at coordinating. And so I can't make that commitment to say we'll get that information, but one thing, if that's the direction of this committee, as we pursue, we can do our due diligence and see what we are able to obtain going forward.
So perhaps if we move forward with moving towards a recommended action, if that's where we go, and now we do have information about what the cost would be. So thank you for preparing that. Maybe that recommended action discussion brings with it some additional data points.
Yes, very well. That could happen if we result in going in that direction. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you. Director Geisinger.
I don't have much else to say. I was going to make the same suggestion, is that let's reach out to the Secretary of State's office and make sure. I know people try to get ballots back in early, and Colorado is very voter friendly. I like this idea, but I think, yeah, let's make sure we're solving the problem in the best way possible. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Geisinger. Director Rosenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry to everyone that I had to drop off and attend to something, so I am back, and I apologize I missed the first part of the discussion. So as I read the memo and as I understand this issue, I guess my concern is similar to Director Cook's, that we're really not addressing something that really would be needed in a sense. My understanding of the statistic is that over 95% of people vote by mail, and including, as General Manager pointed out, that, and I love this, that we have drop boxes at many of our light rail stations and such. So I guess I don't see why this might, allure people to vote in person. As I mentioned last time we discussed this, I'm one of the very, 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 very few who actually vote in person, and some people who do vote in person vote early. So, so my sense is, so that I'd like to share that with the committee, all the fellow directors rather, and the committee. And then I'd also like to share that my preference is that we have a group of days that we can choose from. There are a number of days that I think would also provide this sense of community appreciations and value. Things like Veterans Day, Cinco de Mayo, Juneteenth, some Labor Day, Memorial Day, July 4th, that I think that we should consider. And so if we're going to consider just Election Day, I think we're shortchanging ourselves. We need to consider other options. And then also maybe if we do consider one day for this year, maybe we should also just go ahead and decide for next year as well, so we don't have to address this again. So those are two of the things that I'd like to bring up. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rosenthal. Yeah, but I'd love to, if we could, stay focused on the general election to get some direction to staff as to whether to proceed with that, knowing what those costs might be and whether we would move forward. And then I think we could look at, whether there are other days that we would examine. So with that being said, yeah, thank you for the comments on that. I'll save my comments for the end, just regarding the day itself. Did anyone from staff, Ms. Johnson or anybody else, want to comment on Director Rosenthal's input regarding the general election day and the number of folks who vote via mail?
Not at this juncture. I would say what I think would be helpful if we pursue this in a greater degree. A reference was made to the state of Colorado, recognizing I hail from the state of California. those same discussions had spawned during the course of time in which we effectuated this as well. And I think for all intents and purposes, it is the element of the community value piece, recognizing to the point that Director Rosenthal stated that some people still like to go to the polls. This is not going to be a comprehensive solution relative to alleviating all barriers, but it is a step in the right direction, recognizing how many transit agencies across the country already have embraced a program such as this and have been doing so for years. I think we could, glean from that as we really look to see what it is, especially when we talk about the constitutional right, and then more specifically, the underrepresented populations that often have not been able to cast their vote in reference to everything that's going on in America collectively about limiting voter rights. I frame that in the sense of our commitment to, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And so that would be my comment there to add to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you, Director Rosenthal. Director Bouquet.
Could I, point of privilege, would you mind if I spoke after Director Tisdale and Director Broom and let them have their first bite at the apple?
No problem, sir. I will call on Director Tisdale.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for allowing an interloper not on the committee to address the topic. I thought Director Rosenthal made some excellent points, and I appreciated the opportunity to hear those. I was particularly impressed by an observation made by Director Cook. I believe that this actually provides a great opportunity for us to make a statement, and that's something that I think we should welcome in these days of continuing criticism of RTD. As I have said before, RTD, like the prophet, is not without honor except in its own land. And that's something that gives us pause from time to time. But let's, as Director Cook was stating, let's be strategic on this and not simply reactionary. Let's be intentional. And so therefore, let us get some more data so that we see what this actually means and then take action based upon that. And that would be my comment, and I thank you for the opportunity to make it.
Thank you very much, sir. Much appreciated. I see Director Bouquet. I'll save you. Director Deschel, I see your hand next.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate Director Tisdale and Director Rosenthal, your comments. I think one of the traps we fall into as policymakers, and historically our country's fallen into as policymakers, is we study things to death. We want everything that comes out to be perfect. Well, if we're going to consider this, we need to consider all these other things too. And I am just as guilty, which is why I've tried to start tonight to switch to, this is a great start. There is a lot of value in experimentation and iteration, following up and retooling things and going back out to market. It's one of the biggest complaints about government is the inefficiency. And so for me, if you phrase it the other way, which is RTD voted no or said no to providing free transit on election day. To me, this is a no-brainer of let's start, let's take the first step. And if we are genuinely passionate about all these other things, which I think we really are, let's study it and let's pay careful attention. And let's study a pilot that's actually applicable in our market. And not necessarily a study about someone else's, which we use some analytical tool and regressive analysis to figure out how well it may or may not work here. And so I really do appreciate, it's talking earlier about spare the fair. It's an experiment, right? And with voting, I think that one probably isn't, great American democracy is an experiment. But that aside, I think with voting, that one probably might not be an experiment, but the way in which we do it and ways to evolve, I think that's, more than providing the free day, that's where we deliver our value, is in our follow-up, in our analysis, in our retooling. For now, let's get to market. Let's get out there and get people the ability to vote.
Thank you very much, Director Deschel. Seeing no other hands up, I know Director Bouquet, you wanted to go at the end there. I'll save my comments for the end, being the chair, but I do have a question, Director Bouquet. Do you mind if I bring that question forward? Thank you. So Ms. Johnson, given some of this discussion around this, one question I have, given your prior experience with these days, do you see opportunities, have you experienced opportunities at your prior agency with collaborating with other community partners? You know, in terms of leveraging this, whether it's as simple as co-marketing, you know, what it is that we're doing and celebrating it and it being a marketing effort, whether that's, you know, anything greater or more than that from a commitment standpoint. Have you seen those type of collaborations with other community partners? Do you see those? Is that something that you would consider exploring if the agency were to move forward with a program like this?
So thank you very much, Director Davidson or Chair Davidson, for the question. I think it's hard for me to say as we talk about partnerships, because when I look at Los Angeles County, there's 28 transit agencies and we all collectively were a part of it. And there was a broad brush campaign, and you think about the Los Angeles region and how large it is. And it was something that was made known and leveraging different publications and social media and things of the like. It was a commitment made by the region as a whole going forward. So when we talk about partnerships, not necessarily certain about what partnerships we would be leveraging here in this region, but I think collectively as relates to marketing it, working with, you know, different, I don't know the appropriate terminology with the reference here, but, you know, the person in each jurisdiction that's responsible for their county, the Board of Elections or what have you, you know, doing it well enough in advance so it's publicized that, hey, on election day, there's free transit rides and there's things along that avenue that could be leveraged to ensure the word gets out. So that would be my response, because it's basically not apples to apples with this region, with us being sort of the only intermodal transit agency here in the region.
Thank you for commenting on that. I appreciate it. Director Bouquet.
All right, thank you. And thank you for letting me wait a little bit. First off, apologies, I forgot LA Metro, my bad, Miss Johnson. Also, maybe it's teaching middle schoolers for 8 hours. That makes me a little less articulate, but thank you, Director Deschel and CEO GM Johnson. You guys put it beautifully. When I envisioned this and when I approached CEO GM Johnson a little bit ago about this, I viewed it more as, you know, a growth opportunity as us as an agency, as a policy to kind of explore going forward. You know, we have a lot of voting accessibility in the state of Colorado. I know that, you know, I wish all the states had as much accessibility as us. The thing though is, you know, can we as an agency, can we as a board enact a free day for election day? And is there any way, you know, and even if it was for me, even if it was one individual using our system for free to get to the polls, you know, that I see as a win, because we don't know, you know, what are going to be those domino effects that ultimately come from. I look at my district, a lot of choice riders where they see, oh, RTD is offering free rides on election day. Maybe I'm going to go out and vote. You know, we're not sure. And, you know, those are some of those, you know, intangibles that we have to kind of have a discussion. And, you know, as Director Deschel put it, you know, it is experimenting. It is going with that risk and seeing. And in my opinion, you know, I don't think this is the biggest risk if we're trying to allow more people to have accessibility when it comes down to voting. And I think it is something that we can establish, you know, as Director Rosenthal said, you know, exploring other free days in the future, you know. But if we keep our scope and study to the general election and we try this out as a board of directors and we figure out, you know, are we having our societal impact? And in my opinion, I think this is just going to have positive societal impacts. Well, mostly positive societal impacts. And so that's where I would end. It's not necessarily a policy to solve an issue, but more of a policy of exploration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Bouquet. I see no other hands. I'll just make the comment that I think that, first of all, thank you, Ms. Johnson, and all those involved in staff for bringing forward the cost estimates. I think that helps make what we're dealing with clear. Certainly, I'm struck by, in our strategic plan, the push for both customer excellence and for community value. And I know that many of us have felt that from a community value standpoint, there's more that we, you know, can be doing to increase the stature and celebrate some of the things that we're doing for the community. So I think when I look at the cost of this and when I look at, where we are in our financial plan right now, I personally think this is a good bet to make in terms of saying, hey, we want to deliver some more community value. We think this could have an impact. We have some amount of data to suggest that some folks have cited lack of transit options as a reason to not vote. I think we all, certainly as Americans, celebrate our right to vote, and access to vote is an important part of that. So to me, this seems like a really great bet to place, but I think we've had a lot of good discussions tonight. Some of the themes that I've heard have been perhaps some more data, perhaps some things to support what it is that we're doing. Duly noted that we could probably study this, endlessly. But the other way to look at this is also to say what did happen. If we were to do something like this and to test it and experiment with it, we could measure how that responded. And perhaps Director Rosenthal, that could, that measurement, that understanding could lend itself and open the door to, examining some of those future days. So before we have any further discussion on what other days there might be, I want to just turn over to Ms. Johnson briefly and just see if you have what you're looking for. I wouldn't want to speak for the committee and say that it sounds like we're moving in this direction, but what I'm hearing is generally positive, with the caveat that we may want some more data going in and some data coming out. So Ms. Johnson, is there anything further you'd like to hear from this committee in terms of next steps? Would you like some further guidance? Would you like us to go around and provide any of that guidance as to what the next steps might be?
So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like further guidance because I'm uncertain as to whether or not we're going to bring this back and in what format will we bring it back. Recognizing the comments that I was able to garner from this discussion, it seemed as if there is an appetite to go forward on one end to see what we can yield, and that would be in the form of bringing a staff recommendation, but recognizing some of the elements relative to obtaining data. I'm not certain what that's going to do for us as we go forward. So further guidance would be greatly appreciated so I can manage everyone's expectations. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much. As a matter of practice, I don't love to do this because we're not voting on a recommended action. So I want to be very clear that this isn't a vote, but I'm wondering if the directors on this committee might just, if I can call on you in order, just give a sense of whether you would favor or be interested in seeing a staff recommended action come forward on this item, and whether or not you would want, additional, what type of information, if any, you would like with that. So I'm just going to go ahead and run around and just ask generally the favor in the direction here. Again, this is not a vote, but Director Broom, would you mind commenting first?
I guess I'd like to know what the Secretary of State thinks about a program like this. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. Director Catlin?
I actually agree with Director Broom, but I think to Director Bouquet's comment, I think philosophically, I believe that eliminating any barriers that we can for people to vote is a good idea.
Okay, thank you, Director Catlin. Director Cook?
Yeah, basically echoing those two. I do think it would be helpful to ask her, how can we make it easier for folks given the system that we have? So I think you've got 3 people. That means it'll come forward regardless, but let's check in with her, get some ideas if she has them about how we can remove those barriers better, perhaps, or not. Maybe she thinks this will be a great program. So thanks.
Thank you, Director Cook. Director Deschel.
Thanks. Echoing the sentiments raised, I also want to elevate the role of county clerks in administering and setting up these elections. Because while it is administered through the Secretary of State, it's the county clerks who are going to have that. I believe, from what I understand, that's who we want to hear from. I mean, yes, Secretary of State and the county clerks for the eight counties here who are going to be administering elections. Those I think also will provide really key data both on the pre and post end of things.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Director Geisinger.
I agree with all of the comments, certainly I'm all in favor of removing any barriers. And I also believe that this would be a good step in community value. I think that, part of my thought in reaching out to the Secretary of State's office, and I agree, the county clerks, it's just a matter of how many we want to reach to, but at least some of them, but is that we're building support, in addition to two things. We know if we're aiming the right target, and secondly, they're sending a lot of information out, that can help with that kind of support. But I like the idea. I like where we're going.
Thank you very much, Director Geisinger. Director Whitmore.
Well, I hate to be redundant, so I will try to be brief. I think, reaching out to the clerks and SOS would be prudent to make sure we are fashioning a helpful program. I do appreciate the spirit in offering this program. Echo Director McKay's thoughts. The $376,000 pill is a little tough to swallow, but if we have a little bit of input, maybe from some of our election officials, that's something I can certainly entertain and then look at other events, as Director Rosenthal said, perhaps after this is decided. I certainly would think this would be worthy of taking to the full board. So thank you for the discussion and the thoughts tonight.
Yes, thank you, Director Whitmore. So given where we are, just in looking at, again, generally favorable, some looking for discussion with Secretary of State, some with county clerks, I think that we probably need to put a little bit of a finer point on where we want to go with this. To Director Whitmore's comment there, this may be something we want to bring to the full board. I personally would like to just reflect on the input that we have here and help frame the direction forward. But before we wrap up this discussion, Ms. Johnson, is that helpful, that further information? I'm sure given the discussion here, there's still a need for additional clarity. Is that fair?
It is fair. And thank you, Director Deschel. I was trying to think of county clerk. One thing I would say from our experience in working with placing the drop-off boxes, we yielded much more success coordinating with the county clerks. When you recognize that the Secretary of State oversees the entire state, we don't provide service to the entire state. So as it relates to the path forward, I want to be clear that I understand, is it to reach out to the county clerks and then come back and report that to you, or are we looking to bring back a recommended action item? Because, and I say this recognizing that the general election is coming up and we're in April, my experience in the success of a program, that you need to establish it as soon as possible. So then that communication and coordination and understanding when you're sending out ballots well in advance that we're offering complimentary transit service. So in an effort to manage the expectations, I am still confused about a timeline. If in fact we bring it back to another discussion session, be that in June, we've lost that window of opportunity. So I'm not advocating either way. What I'm trying to do as your employee is to ensure that I'm providing you with information as requested, but there still needs to be some clarity as to what it is that we're doing, because I can bring this as a discussion item, but if I'm doubling back, we have missed the window of opportunity, at least for the general election that's forthcoming in November, which is just in a few months.
So thank you for that comment. So along those lines, and certainly good to know on the timing. So Director Broom, Director Catlin, Director Cook, to perhaps a lesser extent, but still Director Deschel with the clerks, and Director Geisinger, Whitmore, all folks who have suggested we may want to gather a little bit more information. For what it's worth, I think one thing we could do here, we're able to move this year. We've had difficulties with service due to our people power problem, which we're working on to address. I think we have the finances to be able to move forward with something like this. something that we could do in recognition that this would be joining a cohort of many other transit agencies where there's some precedent. We could move forward and ask staff to bring forward a recommended action, and then work in tandem and reach out to the county clerks as well as the Secretary of State to make them aware of what we're doing, ask them to help us with the program, ask them to give us some more information, ask them to help us measure the impact. And also, I think Director Cookie brought up a very good point about what else could we do? What are the opportunities to improve this? Perhaps not for this year, recognizing the time, but for future years, similar to along the lines of Director Deschelle's comment earlier in the evening about, wanting to be involved earlier in framing up what we know as a transit agency. So one suggestion I might put out there for the group is how people would feel about moving forward with something this year, given the timing, and then engaging those stakeholders, basically saying, look, we're confidently moving forward with this, help us measure it, help us identify future opportunities, and perhaps feed some information that could inform the recommended action. I'm just going to open the floor again. Apologies that we're going a little bit long here, but Ms. Johnson, thank you for the clarity that we do need some extra guidance here. Perhaps some folks can comment. Ms. Johnson, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I would just say, in my experience, this is the same circumstance. It's like public transportation is as the bus turns. Different actors, but basically the same storyline, and you can catch up. So with that being said, my initial foray in this arena was the same thing. We did it for one election period and then looked at it and brought back a commitment as related to the general elections going forward. So you just sparked that recollection on my part that I just wanted to offer up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. And I'll open the floor to those on the committee just to comment on whether that plan sounds good. Dr. Bouquet, I see that your hand is up and would be more than happy to give you the floor.
Would you like to hear from voting committee members first, or?
You go for it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I was just going to say, we have to be careful. I do appreciate the idea of looking and searching for more information, but like when I was hearing it, if I was in CEO GM Johnson's, I would be a little confused too, because I would be thinking, oh, well, do you want us to go to the county clerks and say, are you all for this, or do you want us to? What would make it easiest for you guys as county clerks, as us as a transit agency? And when I heard the latter, I'm like, that just sounds like a whole nother recommended action. That seems like a whole nother path we could go down. So my preference, I'm a little biased in this, but my preference would be to, go forward with this as a recommended action, just saying, based on what has been laid out, us as a board of directors would want to make a fare free day, communicate that with the county clerks, not prior, but us acting as our own autonomous organization, our own autonomous board, to go forward and say, this is our recommended action. If it passes, or if it gets to the full board, communicate that with our county clerks, and then kind of establish, as we've talked about building those partnerships, what can we do, going forward to make it as easy as possible for this election cycle, but then election cycles into the future. So that would be my preference is, let's not muddy things up too much. But rather, go forward where our scope of study is right now, and then start building those partnerships either after recommended action. But that would be my preference.
Thank you, Director Bouquet. I see some committee members with hands up. Director Deschelle?
My push would be recommended action with commitment for follow-up for a recommended action as a pilot, with commitment for follow-up for a permanent plan, or a permanent, I know people don't like the word permanent, a longer term plan would be my push and my ask, especially given we don't meet in August, I believe, under our new structure. So we gotta go.
Very good. Thank you. I've kind of got people on a spectrum here on my paper of favorable, and then who would want to speak to whom in the beginning. So I'm going to pull you to favorable for now. Director Broom?
Well, one obvious question we should answer is, what are we going to have to cut from our next run board to cover the cost of this?
Ms. Johnson, do you have a comment on that?
So this, I think it's a circular discussion, recognizing where we've been talking about this fare-free aspect of the ozone. As I stated before, that we had money that we did a money swap quite naturally when we got monies initially, where we committed to implementing recommendations from the state auditor and things of the like. Mr. McLeod is on the line. Quite naturally, before bringing this to you, I ensured that we had an understanding if we could cover the cost of this. We're talking 1 day versus 30. So with that, Mr. McLeod, if you could address this, I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, General Manager Johnson. Yes, agreed. We do have the money. $336,000 is a significant amount of money. However, in the whole scheme of things, yes, it would be a fund swap that we could use. Available funding that's freed up from the fund swap of receiving federal COVID money. So we do have the funds available.
Thank you very much, Mr. McLeod.
Thank you very much. Does that answer your question, Director Broom? Did you have further questions, comments?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Director Whitmore?
So if I could ask General Manager Johnson, the program description that Director Deschel just verbalized quite eloquently all night long. You've been doing a good job, and I appreciate that. Is that in parallel with what you had suggested and what you had done in the past? I guess I'm just trying to see if that his description is meeting your semi-comfort level.
So thank you very much, Director Whitmore. If I may, what I heard was collectively we would bring for your consideration if this was effectuated, or if this was agreed upon, I'm sorry, and an action, a staff recommendation would come forward that would consist of staff saying that we will look at this for the general election in 2022, evaluate the data that we're able to accumulate regarding putting forward an impact to the community, bringing that back, and then making a more long-term, air quote, long-term decision. Because there's a couple of things that we could do, you know, as we look at boardings, utilizing, you know, different mechanisms with boardings perhaps. And then, you know, there could be other strategies that we could look at going forward to determine. I need to work with our operations staff to designate how we may do that, just holistically trying to figure out how to capture folks going primarily to the polls. But I'm rambling at this point. I apologize. I'm tired. I'm going on 14 hours. So as we talk about what it is that we need to do, basically it's a pilot program for just for general election of 2022. That's what I understand. Director Deschel, did I capture that? Yes, thank you very kindly.
All right, thank you very much. I'm in agreement with Director Deschel's strategy session there. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Geisinger.
I'm fine with this coming forward as a recommended action. I still think, I mean, I'd be happy to make a phone call to the Secretary of State or the county clerk. I still think that doing it just to know, you know, just to not to make a huge deal out of it, but just to make sure, you know, to sort of say we're doing this along with you and everybody else seems to me to make sense. But I like, you know, I like the idea, and I'd say it's fine. We can move forward.
Great. Director Broom, I think your hand is up. Any further questions, comments?
Not on this, but I do want to speak under other matters.
Okay, great. We will definitely do that. So just looking at that, I recognize that this is still a little bit murky, but this is looking generally favorable. I would ask that, Director Geisinger, sorry, I see your hand is back up. Oh, okay, sorry. I would say that from what we heard here, with the exception of perhaps a phone call to the Secretary of State, which Director Geisinger, if you wouldn't mind reaching out to Ms. Johnson with any pertinent information, it sounds like the idea of a pilot program would be generally favorable. So my request would be if Ms. Johnson, you could come forward with staff recommended action to this this committee regarding a pilot, what we would consider a pilot for this year, to look at we have the financial impact, but to look at how we might proceed with doing that, what additional data we can bring forward. Ms. Johnson, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarity. We as staff can reach out to the counties if that's the desire. I'm kind of confused again if First Chair Geisinger is going to reach out to the Secretary of State. How is that aligning in reference to staff's recommendation? I just want to be clear who's on first regarding the aspects that need to be done to provide a level of comfort. And, you know, because I would assume if we're bringing forward a recommended action, we need to talk in such a way where we can document. And that's not a slight to First Chair Geisinger because we work together on various things, but I just want to be clear what the expectation is of who's doing what, because it's getting a little more muddy for me and perhaps I'm just not comprehending because I'm fatigued.
I would see this as being staff-led on the action itself, given that you have the prior experience on the pilot program. I think what I would ask for other directors would be if there is additional input to provide that input to staff through Ms. Johnson. But Director Geisinger, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, you know, I always coordinate anytime I make any phone calls. I work, you know, I work with you, I think. And my only point was that by reaching out before we, you know, make a decision and make an announcement, I feel like we're building the community value. But I'll leave it up to you. I'm fine with moving forward with the recommended action.
And First Chair Geisinger, I agree. I support that as well. I was trying to ascertain who was doing what. So I don't disagree whatsoever, that it would be helpful to have an understanding beforehand. So
great. Thanks.
Great. Well, I have seen, I think just in looking at tracking the feedback here, good response, positive response for a staff-led recommended action to come forward with a pilot program focus on this election cycle and looking at reaching out to county clerks as well as Secretary of State to garner and drive that community value. So we'll take a look at that. Perhaps we'll have some discussion and debate at that point regarding whether we're going to be moving forward. With that, I don't see any other hands up. Is there any further discussion or any further points from Ms. Johnson regarding further clarity? All right. Thank you very much. Lengthier discussion than I anticipated, but I appreciate all of the input from everybody. We're going to go ahead and move into other matters. I know Director Broom, you had your hand raised for other matters. Please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chair. It's been quite a while since we've had a legal update on outstanding litigation. And another question I have, do we still have a board committee overseeing this area?
Ms. Johnson, if you wouldn't mind commenting on this.
I will give
Ms.
the floor to General Counsel Snyder. I do recall she did reference this a couple of meetings ago as well. So General Counsel Snyder.
Yes, there's not any updates right now on the major pending litigation. That's obviously the one outstanding with our concessionaire DTP. We're still waiting on the Denver District Court to issue an order. And we do not have a continuing ongoing ad hoc litigation committee that dissolved at the end of last year. But I will certainly keep the board apprised if there's any updates. Those will come through.
Okay, that suffices for me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Director Broom. Thank you, General Counsel Snyder. Director Deschel.
Yeah, last month we began a discussion on refinancing bonds versus COPs, trade-offs there, and I just want to make sure I know we had sort of a tight fuse and want to make sure that staff has what it needs from this group in order to move forward, or does this need to go to the full board for discussion? I don't want to lose not that we're losing it, but I want to make sure we keep a tight watch on that, given its importance. And 120 million or 100 some odd million in present dollars is it's a lot of money. It's a really important decision.
Thank you, Director Deschel. So we did receive follow-up regarding the case law as well as comments from bond counsel that did go to the board upon our request from the last committee discussion, clarifying the position on the decision. Ms. Johnson or General Counsel Snyder, would you like to comment on that at all? And also I'd just broadly open the floor if Mr. McLeod, you want to comment at all about the information that you have available in terms of what you will bring forward to this committee next. So I'll just open the floor generally to the three of you.
So thank you very much, Mr. Davidson, Chair Davidson, I'm sorry. Mr. McLeod and I just discussed this afternoon the path forward, recognizing the information that you did receive from General Counsel as well as bond counsel, recognizing the timeline. Mr. McLeod was going to prepare a recommended action item that would come forward to this body. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. McLeod, it was in June.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very kindly. So we do have the pertinent information relative to receiving that guidance. And we will bring that forward, and quite naturally it would come to this committee and then collectively to the entire board for its consideration.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments. And for those of you that haven't had a chance to take a look at the follow-up, I certainly encourage you to do so. There is a statement in there that from bond counsel that based upon the standard and the review of the relevant cases, that bond counsel does not believe they can issue a validity opinion for bonds pursuant to the 2004 fast track election if those bonds are issued after November 2nd, 2024, which would be that 20-year mark. So encourage board members to take a look at the feedback that we did receive in writing and submit any questions that you have to staff. So thank you, Director Deschel, for raising the item. Anything else in other matters? Great. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. The next meeting date of this committee will be Tuesday, May 10th, 2022, Finance and Planning Committee. We will go ahead and adjourn, seeing no further discussion, and this meeting will be adjourned at 9:09 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thank you very much, y'all. Bye-bye.